Very brief updates. First, some may have seen it. You did get an email from Kristen Long earlier today. The Building Code Advisory Board did interview an applicant for a vacancy on the board, and they have recommended Amy Forster from Ward 2. And so if council is supportive of that appointment, we'll move that forward for your formal action. There still is a vacancy in Ward 1, and we'll continue to advertise for that vacancy. It's the Building Code Advisory Board. They don't meet super frequently.
Does anybody have a problem with moving forward with the committee's recommendation? Okay.
No, we're good. Yep.
Right.
And then second, we were made aware that the Ward 1 council members would like their informal Ward 1 meeting to be added to the council calendar. We're happy to do that, but did want to raise the question for more broadly. Generally, we have not been adding those unless I know Councilmember Martinez asked at a previous meeting a couple of.
I think you said Ward 1. I was actually referring to the upcoming Ward 2 meeting.
Oh, Ward 2.
The Ward 1 meeting we made a specific request to ask it be noticed so that any council member could attend, and I think that we should do that before.
Well, that was what, sorry, I misunderstood that it wasn't the Ward 1 meeting, and that's the question I was gonna call, is that we had done that previously for the Ward 1 meeting. Is that a practice that the council would like to see for all? The only caveat is we will need to make sure that you all know sometimes we know that they're happening because they're happening in city facilities and we help you to facilitate, but other meetings are happening in private businesses and locations, and we don't always necessarily know, get formal notice of those to post them. So.
Yeah, Madam City Manager. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I have no problem with that. I mean, when I was, when I lived here, I've gone to all the board meetings, not just my ward. So I think that's a good idea that, they should be on our calendar that way. We don't have to, we have to have a public meeting. So yeah, I'm in agreement with that. And then, so our Ward 2 community meeting will be Sunday afternoon, 1 p.m. at Carpenter Recreation Center with Mayor Pro Tem Ayala and myself. We're looking forward to hearing from neighbors. We have lots of Ward 2 items to talk about, and then we'll have Q&A. So
what we may do is I'll ask Joanna Chavez to follow up with everybody, and we'll try to create maybe a protocol or a system so that we don't miss anything. So we'll get that out to everybody just so that we make sure as you're planning something, it's on our radar, and then we get it added formally to the calendar.
Yeah, I think the only thing I see as a possible issue is that, like, if it's a ward meeting for like Ward 2, for example, those council members should bring it to the city to put it up, because that could lead to confusion about, is it a campaign event or is it an actual just a something in our capacity as council? So if it's going to be on a calendar, I think that's my only suggestion, is that it be brought forward by the actual ward that's presenting that meeting.
I would agree with that, because if David and I set up a meeting and something happens that we can't show up to it, then we're the ones that need to be facilitating that information back and forth too.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any questions or concerns about that?
Okay, we'll try to put together maybe some protocols and bring it back maybe to a planning session to get some broader feedback and review before we put that into place. But for now, we will get the Ward 2 meeting posted.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, and that's it. I had.
Nothing from me tonight.
All right, thank you. Well, we will start with our briefings. The first one is the 2026 Environmental Sustainability Master Plan Overview.
And Emily Hunt is going to kick this off. This is a long effort supported by the council, initiated by council members. Thanks to both the staff and many members of our community that were on the task force that have assisted. So I give the floor to Emily.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. I'm Emily Hunt, Interim Infrastructure and Utilities Director, and I'm here with Andrea Green with Blue Strike Environmental, our consultant on this project, and Martin Postma, principal planner with the city. So we have wrapped up our sustainability master plan, and we're here to present to you tonight kind of an overview of how we got here and also specifically what's in the plan. So our agenda tonight is to just review the purpose and background of the master plan, to talk a bit about the involvement that we had with the community and how they informed this plan. Well, we'll go through some of the specific measures and sustainability actions that the plan identifies for us to put into place. We'll talk about the implementation plan as well as the alignment with this plan has with the city's strategic plan. We'll talk about the recommendation from the Environmental Sustainability Task Force on this plan and then next steps. This item is on the council calendar next week for formal adoption. So this is a bit of a heads up and a chance to have you ask any questions you might have. So once again, the purpose of the Sustainability Master Plan is to have a localized master plan that's both equitable and ambitious for the city. This is really going to be the roadmap for us to achieve climate mitigation, resilience, and sustainability for all residents across all communities. As I mentioned, it does align with the city's strategic plan as well as the comp plan, and it builds on existing efforts that exist through other city plans as well as sustainability efforts that are ongoing with current city departments. So I'll hand it over to Andrea to talk about where we've been and where we're at now.
Yeah, so this is an overview of the timeline for the project, and staff really started to lay the groundwork for this plan in summer of 2024 with the creation of the Environmental Sustainability Task Force, and then the release of the RFP to find a consultant, and then ultimately hiring Blue Strike to lead the development of the plan. We kicked off the project in early 2025 with a baseline assessment, reviewing existing city plans, doing a greenhouse gas inventory, and kicking off some of our engagement efforts. We began strategy development over the summer and into the fall, continuing those engagement efforts, wrapped that up in the fall and finalized the goals, strategies, and actions, drafted the plan itself, and then finalized the plan in early of 2026. And as Emily mentioned, it's now ready for adoption. So some of our key findings from the engagement efforts that we did included some results from a survey. We found that 43% of our survey participants were very concerned about climate change. 40% called for urgent action from the city. Some other comments that we got included calls for education, school programs, green jobs, and partnerships across the community. Some top priorities included renewable energy and efficiency, public transit, biking, walking, water conservation, waste reduction, and tree planting. Some of the barriers that were identified were high costs for implementation, a general lack of information among the community, limited control over some of the issues, and then infrastructure gaps. Overall, there was a focus on equity throughout this process, and there was also a call to invest in underserved neighborhoods and make sure that the ESMP's programs were available to those folks as well. So early on in the project, we worked with staff to identify 5 focus areas for the plan. Those are maintaining the ESMP, buildings and energy systems, natural systems, community and environmental protections, sustainable transportation, land use and infrastructure resiliency, and materials waste and water management. So the plan is really structured around those 5 categories. And in just a second here, Martin's going to run through a couple of examples of the goals and strategies from the plan. You'll see on these screenshots from the plan that there are several metrics that we identified for each. The first being a priority score. So each strategy was scored against a set of criteria that was selected by the staff. That criteria included the potential for greenhouse gas mitigation, the cost of implementation, resilience impacts, and equity impacts. The second metric you'll see is the greenhouse gas reduction potential, and that's ranked low, medium, and high. This is a relative measure amongst all the strategies in the plan. Similarly, we have a cost estimate, which is a relative measure, but for the action items, which are a little bit more granular. And then finally, each strategy has a strategic plan alignment icon, which aligns it with one of the strategic focus areas. So I'll pass it to Martin.
Thank you. A little small. The next few slides provide examples of the goals, strategies, and actions contained within the plan. The strategy is to build community and business partnerships. It is under the goal to ensure long-term accountability and support the sustainability programs. It has an overall priority of 3. The greenhouse gas reduction potential of this strategy is low, and the strategic plan focus area is safe, supported, and livable communities. The proposed partners are listed at the bottom, and the specific actions and their recommended start years and cost estimates are indicated at the right. These are to implement sustainability workshops for businesses and develop a business sustainability recognition program. This goal is to improve energy efficiency and advance electrification by 50% by 2035, 80% by 2045, and 100% in residential, commercial, and institutional structures by 2050 when compared with the 2024 baseline. This particular strategy is to support energy efficiency and electrification upgrades in residential buildings and is a priority 1 item. This strategy has a high potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and identifies partner organizations, which include Xcel Energy and the Colorado Energy Office. This strategy includes 4 action items, each of which has its own start year and cost estimate. They include improving access to weatherization and connecting residents to funding sources. This strategy is to advocate for the reduction of harmful chemical and pollution exposure. It is within the goal to protect environmental quality and advance environmental justice. It carries a priority 2 score. The strategic focus area is safe, supported, and livable communities, and the key partners are listed at the bottom. There are 4 actions associated with this strategy, again, each identified with its own recommended start year and cost estimate. These include environmentally friendly pest management and water efficient landscape irrigation. This strategy is to promote alternatives to single occupancy vehicles. It is within the goal to expand safe, convenient, and connected multimodal transportation options to reduce single occupancy vehicle trips by 20% by 2035, 35% by 2050, in comparison to the 2024 baseline. As with the others, city leads and partners and its greenhouse gas reduction potential are identified, and the specific strategies are also articulated. These include expanding carpooling programs, supporting public transit access, and enhancing bike and scooter infrastructure. This final example is the strategy to build community and business partnerships. It is within the goal to increase waste diversion by city-served customers with the percentage goals going out to 2050. It carries a priority score of 3. City leads and partners are identified, as well as its greenhouse gas reduction potential and strategic focus area. There are 4 actions identified to implement this strategy, including food waste diversion programs for schools and hospitals. One of the 4 strategic plan operational teams, or SPOTs, is the implementation of the Sustainability Master Plan. This team has contributed to the development of the plan, has reviewed the strategies and actions thoroughly, and is currently underway to help ensure a path forward to their implementation.
So that was really just a snapshot. We have 141 actions that were identified in the Sustainability Master Plan. Obviously, a lot of detail to each and a lot of intersection with existing programs, with the strategic plan and departments. I do want to mention and thank the Environmental Sustainability Task Force. I saw Vivian come in. Is Miranda here? Vivian, would you mind standing up? So we had a dedicated team of residents, eight folks that helped us throughout this entire process, really informed the plan, gave us direction and guidance, helped with our community engagement, and really appreciate all the work that they did. The charge of the task force was actually to help inform this plan and to eventually hopefully recommend the plan to City Council for its adoption, which, as you can see here, they do recommend this plan There's a nice letter from them at the beginning of the plan. Here's a photo of the group at our last meeting. So they've just been really instrumental, and the community engagement and the dedication that they showed is really appreciated, and I think makes this plan very meaningful and very reflective of what the community wants. There is recommendations in the plan to continue the task force into the future as this program evolves, and specifically we'll keep them engaged through the strategic plan process as the operating team that Martin was talking about works on the implementation piece of the plan. The other thing that I wanted to note is that the city has received grant funding from DRCOG for a position that will help support this effort. That position will be primarily focused on the building and energy piece, but we'll be able to use that position to help move a lot of these efforts forward. So that'll really help the departments and the sustainability task force kind of move this along. So in terms of next steps, as I mentioned, the plan is complete. You have a copy of it in your packet. We do have this on the council agenda next week for formal adoption. And if council adopts the plan, then we'll kick into the mode of not just implementation through the task force as well as the sustainability coordinator, but we'll also begin sharing this plan with the community. We've got a website that we'll keep updated. We have a storyboard. I couldn't remember the name of it. Story map that we'll put up online that will be a nice, a more accessible way for the community to walk through this plan and see what the plan is. And then, as I mentioned, this will continue to be kind of overseen by the strategic plan operating a team assigned to this goal. So that's the update that we have. Thank you to council for your direction on this project and for your support of it. I think everybody's really pleased with how it came out. So happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions? Justin?
Thank you for that presentation. Really excited to see all this stuff come to reality, and I know that it was a lot of work, and I appreciate all the work that you and the task force members and the consulting company helped in on. I do have a couple of questions specifically around the partnerships that we might be involved with achieving some of our goals. For example, the BE1 plan that you talked about regarding electrification. It sounds like a really great opportunity to partner with Power Ahead Colorado, which is the program that DRCOG is running for electrification across the whole region. And so my question is, at what point do we start, if this plan is adopted, how do we, how are the partnerships incorporated into this plan, and where do we draw the lines as far as like what Thornton does on its own versus how do we leverage partnerships for these larger regional efforts that are already well funded and underway?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think especially in the building and the electrification side of thing, having that DRCOG grant, that's already kind of a natural connection into all of the efforts that they're doing. That partnership, DRCOG will also be wanting to partner with us. So I think that will be something that will naturally happen. And that's a place where we really do need partnerships because we don't have control necessarily. We have control over city facilities, but we don't have control over residential or commercial electrification type programs. So I think we'll be relying pretty heavily on DRCOG in those programs. Some of the other partnerships are going to be something that we need to cultivate a little bit more explicitly. Some of the ones that are around transportation, that'll be aligned with the Transportation and Mobility Master Plan. We've already got good partnerships with school districts, but I think some of them will take a little bit more cultivating. And then we do have a lot identified in the plan that the city does have agency over. So, water efficiency, parks management, and waste reduction, that kind of thing. So
do you think having this plan adopted and implemented will give us an advantage for future Power Ahead grants that might come available? Will help?
do you want to comment?
Good question. It always helps to have programs identified in plans with cost estimates and dates and assignments in place for departments to be in charge when applying for grants. Because then you can reference those things which have been approved by the city council. And the city then has already made a statement that that's something that is a priority to it. And we can say that to other agencies that might have funding sources available to us. Certainly is and can be an advantage.
Okay, awesome. One more question is the, how will the different initiatives, if this plan is adopted, could you explain how that will translate into the specific initiatives and requests for the 2027 budget?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. So a lot of them are already identified in individual division budgets. So I'll take water, for example. We have a water efficiency program that will be budgeting traditionally as we have. There are some new initiatives that will be coming out of the SPOT group. And so any costs that are associated with 2027 budget needs will be developed by the SPOT group and then likely will be incorporated into probably the infrastructure department budget request and we'll be identifying specifically, strategic plan type requests that may be above and beyond what a typical operating budget would have had last year.
Right.
It's helpful.
I think it would be very helpful for the council when you give the budget, as I've gone through 2 of them now, that for the specific things that are called out in our presentation, mention, this, how it ties to the ESMP, or, thinking more broadly, all of the different master plans we have, like, for example, if it's a stamp, stationary master plan one or anything like that, it's just very helpful to tie the specific items or the discussions we talk about to our other strategic documents that support our bigger strategic document. So thank you. Appreciate all your work.
We can certainly do that. Last year, you did see new budget enhancements aligned to the areas of the strategic plan. So certainly would intend to do that and highlight those things that had come through spot requests, but we can also try to identify if there are other adopted plans that the requests are aligned to.
Thank you.
Okay, then we have Councilmember Byrd.
On slide 7, the sustainability measures, you have the cost estimate stuff kind of listed out as $, $2 $3 signs. What does that equivalent to? Because I mean, it could be between $1 and $1 million.
And it's cost and resources, so it can be cost as well as staff time. So it really is just kind of a relative measure, and I would say a single dollar sign means something that we can likely implement with existing staff and resources. The $2 sign might be, we need to add some budget amount, but maybe can do it with existing staff. The $3 sign is probably, a more significant resource request. Would you add anything to that, Andrea?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. The high level being more of a potentially capital infrastructure improvement, the middle level being programs, studies, pilot programs, that type of thing, and then the low level being maybe just a policy outreach, coordination with community partners, that type of action.
The BE1 goal of 100% by 2050, that's a pretty strong goal. To be able to become 100% energy efficient from a city standpoint, that's gonna be pretty costly to us as far as infrastructure and upgrades, because I'm not sure that this building is not anywhere near what your 50% for just this one building. So how is that being taken into account for those cost measures?
If I recall, these goals are aligned with regional and statewide goals. And so there are a lot of outside programs that the city will rely on in order to get us into this sort of level of what we're shooting for here. It won't be entirely on the city, and we'll be relying on a lot of those programs that are trying to get the entire state there by that same timeframe.
And it says that it's for existing buildings that are in place. How does that gonna impact, say, if a data center wants to come to Thornton?
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole other question that we could handle on kind of the development side of things. You know, we can decide that we need to see certain energy or water improvements or something like that if the data center shows interest in coming to Thornton, so.
And one of my next questions, you know, there's lots of talks with partnerships with companies like Excel. Our residents right now don't like Excel because they've already cut off the power 4 times to people in our area. How is that gonna take into effect? We're trying to go to something that's gonna be extremely reliant on their infrastructure.
Yeah, well, I mean, they've got so many different arms of that operation, and they do have a pretty strong arm around building electrification and that sort of thing, and you know, whether it's audits for people to get in their house to understand how they're using energy and how they can potentially reduce energy, and then they offer incentive programs. So we'll be relying on the programs that they offer regionally. But I understand that point about that partnership might be difficult to connect our residents to if they're feeling a little
Yeah,
sensitive around that.
We have the state mandating that people move to electric hot water heaters and electric hot water pumps. And then Excel turns the power off, so now you don't have any hot water or heaters. So there's lots of concerns about if we can even trust that aspect of them.
That's a fair point.
All right, and Councilmember Algebra.
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. Great job with the presentation, Emily. Great job, Task Force, Vivian. Great work. You know, I want to thank the previous council for their foresight to get this thing off the ground. I've been following it along over the last year, and you know, I was campaigning and then seeing now we're going to make this a reality, and I'm fully supportive of this. This is something I really want to see moving forward for our city, and why I ran is because we need the partnerships and collaborations in all projects that we do to make our community better and the region better. You know, this is a community first, right, Thornton? But still, we have to help each other out, right? So this is a big step for our city in achieving that goal to help our neighbors out. So as I said, I'm fully supportive of this. I love the fact of all the partnerships, like, well, we mentioned Excel, obviously, they're part of it, but then all the different government entities, whether it's municipal, county, state, federal. But going to state and federal, you know, with the economic climate of those last two, now with the state facing $1.5 billion budget, not just $1 billion, and a lot of this money that's coming in is grant money. What is our plan if those grants are not available to implement what we want to do?
Yeah, I know that's one of the things that the spot team is actually working on is kind of what do we have agency over? How can we move this plan forward as a city, given existing resources? And that'll be kind of a core component of the plan. And we might have to look at some of the other things more opportunistically due to the funding constraints that you're talking about. Those partnerships are there.
Yeah, but now this is a living thing. This is an ongoing thing. So obviously we're going to be reviewing it constantly, which is imperative too for transparency purposes. So, all right, thank you very much.
Councilmember Morris.
Just a couple of things. I want to say thanks to the citizens that were involved in this. I know that this is a massive document. I can't even imagine like what those conversations were like over the hours and months of that. You know, one thing that I wanted to try to confirm was, is there anything about what is expected of residents and how they can contribute to this plan? Because I didn't see it. And so I want to ask that first, and then I'll get to my second question.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the residents contributed to the formation of the plan. We did a lot of community outreach and that sort of thing. On our story map, we have a way for residents to kind of share their sustainability stories and talk a bit about, you know, what's important to them, and if they've taken part in any programs, whether it's, you know, any of our lawn replacement programs, they can contribute that way. And one of the recommendations in the plan as it relates to the task force is for that environmental sustainability task force to really be those ambassadors back and forth for the community and to help inform us and the plan as it moves forward as to what the community is seeing. So much of this technology and so many of the needs change really quickly. And so that's one of the ideas is to have that task force to be that connection to the community.
You know, one thing that I mean, this document again is really thorough. It's 200 pages and it's got a lot of like high level, really great kind of aspirational things that I think there's some benefit to what's in the plan. One thing I would ask, and maybe we can ask the council this, is there a way that we can add an element to the sustainability plan where we include like a resident initiative that really breaks it down so it's more of a, maybe instead of like a high level element, there's an element that says like, here's how the average citizen can contribute on a daily basis to this plan. And so like I think about when I was growing up, I remember being taught like littering is bad, and if you see something, even though you didn't put it on the ground, you should pick it up and put it in the trash. Putting oil into the drainage system is a bad idea, or into the ground is bad. Like really kind of basic fundamental things. And I think for the typical resident who is not going to read the 200-page sustainability plan, there are things that we can add to it that become very real and very tangible for kids, so they can be involved and they can support it in a very simple, actionable way. And then it translates directly into how we implement things in schools, how our Parks and Rec is sharing information, social media, and all that. And I think it would just be a better way or an additional way to translate this into real life. Because right now it feels like a very city-centric, like, hey, this is gonna be like internal, we're gonna do some things in our city and we're gonna improve and we're gonna add some things, we're gonna take away some things. And then to echo Councilmember Bird's, like, oh, by the way, like electrification by 2050. I mean, that's like a totally separate challenge and obstacle that maybe hasn't met reality yet. But so I guess I'm asking if the Sustainability Task Force can get involved in adding something like that to this plan, that would be a part of it that we can approve. So it becomes immediately actionable. It's something that we can share on day one.
I do think there's an action in the actual plan around community and community participation and even the communication piece of it. And so what I'm hearing is that we could possibly add, very tangible, easily actionable steps for people to take as a way that we're promoting this plan. And then that would drive them to a more deeper dive in the plan if they were inclined. But so I think we could.
I mean, and make it, again, we want to be measurable. We want to be able to track it. We want to have real action steps that mean something in the real world for the average resident. So there really isn't that right now. It's all very high level and yes.
After you're finished.
No, I'm good. I want to hear.
I just wanted to compliment what Emily said. If we think back a few years to 2020, we have a document called the Sustainability Action Agenda that was approved. And it was a precursor to this plan. And in fact, this plan was recommended out of that, and it comes out of that, as well as the comprehensive plan. That Sustainability Action Agenda had those things in it, just exactly what you were asking about. And those things still stand, right? But what we could do is enhance this perhaps on the website or other means to provide more suggestions directly to residents so that they can contribute to the benefit that this plan describes as well.
Another thought is next week when we're presenting this to council, we can replace some of this detail that we went into with a more community focused resident action sort of thing, if that sounds like it would be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, is there a way for it to be a part of the plan? So like right now we have these, again, different goals, very high level, but nothing that says like, hey, residents, this is how you're involved. Here's how we, again, instead of putting everything on the government to solve problems, how do we put this on, how do we build a responsibility in our citizens to want to be involved and to have actionable goals that are measurable, trackable, and that educate, that inspire, all those things. So that, again, it gains teeth from the average resident, and then we can actually move forward on the ground where not only are we greening up our buildings, but trash along streets is disappearing too, because that's bad for the environment, right? And that's where I think there's a disconnect. Ultimately, we see that with the state. I mean, we can look at our highways. We have so many great green programs. We have the dirtiest highways we've ever had in the state, right? So it's like, how do we be different as a city by accounting for both of those things?
I did want to mention, we do have a section, getting involved is kind of near the end of the plan. And we break that up into a couple different categories, one being actions for the community to take. So they're a little bit higher level than what you're mentioning with like metrics to track the progress on those. But we did kind of translate some of the higher level goals that the city has into some things, just a few bullet points that residents can do. There's also a section for businesses in the community, things that they can do as well. And yeah, that's page 102. Community actions.
Dude, you didn't get to 102?
I did, I must have been lazy.
Well, and I do think we do have members here from the SPOT team, and so I think one of the things we'll be doing a mid-year check-in with you at some point about strategic plan implementation, and we can certainly give direction back to the SPOT in terms of their action plan to prioritize that community engagement and outreach and how to connect, scale, translate these broad objectives into actionable items from the council. So if that's a particular priority for the council, we can give that to the SPOT.
Does anybody else feel that they want that to be more robust in the plan?
I don't think that unless you want to defer action, I'm not sure that we've got time to modify the plan before the plan adoption next week. We certainly could defer the plan and reevaluate the things in the plan, or we could pass that feedback on to our work in terms of the implementation plan.
Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
I don't think we should defer the plan.
I don't got a hard put into it.
We do have those items in there, but they're not exactly built in as like goals to the same level that we see in some of the earlier topics, if I'm looking at that correctly. But I do like seeing that for the community element. I guess, how do I deliver that? I would like it to be known as a priority of this council that the involvement in our community is the most important thing, in my opinion, in this plan. Again, because a 200-page report of the plan is just gonna be stuck on a shelf, and there's gonna be stuff that we do internally in the staff, but how it translates to the real world, we just have to make that connection in the most efficient, effective way.
I do think we could look at the resolution that has been drafted adopting the plan to make sure that that is clear in the guidance from the council, both adopting the plan and giving direction to the staff to implement it. So we can revisit I think the resolution has probably already been drafted, but we can look at the resolution just to make sure that from a policy statement of the council, that's very clear. That would be much easier for us to modify before we send the packet out on Thursday than the plan itself.
Sure.
And I do think that, I just can't find it, but I do think that we've got a specific goal that talks about neighborhood engagement. And so that could be a place where we can highlight that goal and kind of tease it out a little bit better, more clear, more actionable steps. So I think between that and the resolution, I think we can do that before next week for sure.
Great.
So we're okay with moving forward with those changes that we're talking about? Yeah, I agree with Councilmember Morris that we need to have more just more robust conversation about how the communities a part of the solutions we're looking to have. Councilmember Algie and I have had conversations about this specifically around like cleanup of our neighborhoods and how it's easy for folks to say, well, let's call the city and have them clean it up. But sometimes they don't take into account that it's private property or that, some of these parks are huge and in some areas the needs are different and we're having a conversation now about the Grandview ponds and how, because of some of the activity down there, it's caused a lot more, trash and that type of pollution. So, I think where I'm understanding Councilmember Morris is coming from is like, we just want to make sure, I guess if you're probably a kid of the 80s and 90s, you saw a lot more public education on these things. And I think we've moved away from that in recent time. And not to say that the work that wasn't done is phenomenal, because it is, but how do we get to a place where we're putting the effort into these sustainability efforts in a bigger way beyond just having a plan, like you said, that goes on a shelf? Because I've seen that happen too. Lambertson Lakes, I was on Tashco for that, like, still have not seen much with that. But I think just having more of an actual implementation of public education plans are super important to make sure that everybody understands that we're a part of this, not just government creating those solutions, because it's important. So I'm in agreement with that as well. Councilmember Byrd, did you have something else?
Yeah, going through the report, some like the slides are nice, thank you, but going through the actual full report, I feel like there's a few things that were kind of overlooked in some of the areas. So I'm gonna go back to my favorite thing, the money aspect of stuff. BE 1.3B, implement retrofits identified in facility audits. Do we have an idea of what that's actually gonna cost the city? This is your $3 sign ones, that's the big money.
Yeah, so the building maintenance has done facility audits of a lot of the city facilities and have identified specific equipment that either, when it gets replaced, will get replaced with higher efficiency equipment versus things that are, still functioning. So a lot of it is gonna happen through replacement cycles. There might be some opportunities to do things differently right off the bat, but once again, that'll all kind of be, we tried really hard in the plan. Nothing is mandated in here. Everything has to come through the city's budget process, through all of that sort of thing. So building maintenance might be putting forward a budget request to make certain improvements that are in alignment with the sustainability plan. If we can fund those, we can. If we can't, we can't. So, it's similar to a lot of these, all of these goals are nothing is mandated in here, right? It all gets decided on an annual basis, so.
Yeah, and then that same action, BE 1.3D, the pursuit of the solar installations for Thornton buildings. Have we looked into what it would take for, like, this building, for instance, to actually be powered by solar, and then the battery efficiency and things that would go into that as well? I know that when I had solar come out and look at my house, they were like, this is not possible, because I run way too much power at my house.
I believe this building actually is powered by solar already, this specific building. Then the water treatment, the Thornton water treatment plant is the other solar facility that we'd be looking at. And so, to your point, before this would ever get put into place, there would be this cost benefit analysis. We obviously can't put solar at a raw water pump station because it doesn't even make a dent into certain things. So where feasible, where practicable, and where, there might be some grant funding or incentives for the city to do it.
And I do want to reinforce, there's a lot in this plan, and to reiterate that the reason this was reflected in the strategic plan, and that recognizing that there needs to be a separate plan in terms of implementation is to take a second look at these and prioritize them around opportunity resources. And so, again, not the last, back to the comment about not a plan on the shelf, not the last time you're gonna hear about this. You'll hear in the context of priorities over time, how have different elements or recommendations here been prioritized in the implementation plan. So, ultimately, I think that the team will consider how practical, how affordable are different recommendations over a period of time.
All right, anybody else have any concerns? Okay. Well, thank you for everything. We're excited to get that finished or the resolution done. All right, so next is our update discussion regarding housing choice.
Yeah, so you've just heard about a high priority policy plan reaching its finality, and now you're gonna hear about a plan that's in flight. So many of you will remember last year after we finished the development code, there were a lot of interest in continuing to advance our work around housing choice, missing middle, and affordable housing, make sure that our processes, policies, and land use code facilitated those kinds of things. And so this is an attempt to dive deeper into those subjects. So I believe I'm handing the floor to Mike.
Yep.
For further introduction.
Absolutely. Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. Mike Garrett, Planning Director. With me is Aaron Rodakowski with Current Planning, Zach Knows with Long Range Planning, Carlin Boston with Ayers Associates, and Josh I'll do it. Ohava. I always twist that around.
It's always a tough one.
With Ayers Associates as well. Thank you for your time this evening, Council. This presentation is actually a follow-up from the planning session we had with Council back in October to talk about housing choice. Since that time, staff's taken interviews with Council along with the Planning Commission, stakeholder groups, specifically affordable housing developers, along with the general development community. Citizen engagements, and they'll go over that in their presentation, the engagements the staff did along the way as well. Then following the initial assessment and overview of housing choice strategies, this presentation will talk about prioritization, the next step in advancing housing choice, affordability, implementation and alignment of the city goals from the 2025 strategic goals, and we'll go over those real briefly, the 2020 comprehensive plan, and the 2025 housing needs assessments, as well as Proposition 123 requirements. Specifically, we're going to be talking about expedited review process for affordable housing projects, which is an element that's required to be analyzed by Council. If those elements are adopted or implemented by June 30th of this year, the city would be eligible for a $45,000, they call it incentive funding grant with no additional match required. So it's actually encouraging local governments to implement fast tracking development projects aligning with affordable housing before our end deadline, which is January 1st, 2027. The strategies will be discussed this evening will reflect a combination of the technical analysis that's been done on this, stakeholder and community engagement, as I mentioned, and the input we received, and the comparative research that our team with Ayers has done on our peer communities. And the strategy we organized in, as you'll probably see on your packet and in this presentation, from a near term, midterm, and more long-term implementation aspects. The longer term goals and strategies we're looking into today may require additional policy discussions with Council to move forward on those goals as well. In that perspective, this evening, as I mentioned, this is a update from our October discussion with Council. We just recently went to Planning Commission, had the same discussion with them last Tuesday evening. We'll be talking a little brief overview of the project, Council touch points we had, stakeholder community engagements, strategies that were there's 11 strategies that are being suggested, discussion and feedback, and then next steps. And then we do have a consideration slide for Council as well as part of this presentation. And I'll pass this over to Ayers.
All right. Well, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, council members. Pleasure to be in front of you again and see you all since many of you one-on-one conversations a couple months ago. So as Mike mentioned, really the goal, right? What is it we're trying to accomplish here? And it's really to strengthen Thornton's housing diversity when it comes to affordable, attainable housing. You've heard us, we're using the phrase housing choice because affordable means all these different things depending on who you talk to and which industry. Attainable means all these different things and all these different points. And so what we're really trying to do is just understand that there's a need for more housing options and more flexibility within the city, within the different wards that the community members are looking for. And that's something that my colleague Carlin will talk a little bit about as we talk about some of the engagement, outreach, feedback. As we talked about with the scope, a big important element was to engage the community and stakeholders. And it's something you all emphasize as well in your one-on-one conversations, is not just go out and, engage with the community, but really help also bring awareness and understanding to what this notion of housing choice is. And that's where even on the project website, you've seen we created those pro formas or profiles, of different individuals in the community based on their income, affordability, what they could afford for housing in the community based on local statistics and data. So a lot around kind of that education awareness. And then the second part of that, of course, is listening, actively listening, understanding what they're hearing for those challenges, opportunities moving forward. And then another thing we've been doing, and that'll be reflected in some of the strategies that you'll hear from staff here in a little bit, is targeted code updates. You all did a great job over the last couple of years with a lot of the big code updates, incorporating a lot of that flexibility and a lot of those opportunities to create more holistic neighborhoods. And so what this does is take some of those state strategies, some things that are being done in other communities, peer communities, best practices in the industry, and listening also to those stakeholders, the builder and development community, on kind of what's working, what's not, maybe trying to adjust the dials just a little bit to see if that starts to move the needle and just helps make that box just a little bit bigger for them to work within. And then, as Mike mentioned, the expedited review process, which we've done all the process mapping with staff, and there'll be more of that to come in the future. We talked a little bit about already why it matters, so I won't go into that too much further, other than just to hand over to my colleague Carlin, who will go through kind of the process to date and some of the takeaways from the outreach and communication efforts.
Good evening. Great to be here to provide an update on all of the work that we've been doing since we were here in October. And I'm just briefly going to touch on really the main pieces of engagement and outreach that we've been doing. It started with all of you following the kickoff to really, we presented some of there are many tools in the toolbox and presented many of those. And we really wanted to have those one-on-one conversations with all of you and with the mayor to really understand where the guardrails are, what the appetite is for mandated versus sort of incentive-based approaches, to see what the openness to design standards, just those various pieces, what is right really for Thornton as we moved forward to have other discussions. So we did hear that incentives were more desired than the mandates, and really a concern around that missing middle housing was shared. And also interest in really thinking about neighborhood compatibility and thoughtfulness around, really what fits in the community. And looking at some of those flexible tools, incentives around density bonuses. And some of you shared, really wanting to avoid new taxes and looking at other creative approaches. And the same presentation that you're going to hear tonight, we took to Planning Commission, as was mentioned last week. They were generally supportive of the direction, asked, questions around the process, and really interested in the expedited review process. And we also talked a lot about community education and how to bring these pieces back to the community. It was part of a lot of our community engagement, but just really continuing to have that conversation. What does affordability mean? What does attainability mean? And paint the picture of the reality, in the community and those housing challenges. So we definitely want to, thank all of you for your time. And we saw many of you also at some of our engagement events. So appreciate your feedback and engagement in this process. So then we moved on to talking to different stakeholders, and the big group there really were developers, all kinds of different developers. We had HBA, Home Builders Association developers, not affordable housing developers, various nonprofits, really one-on-one interviews, as well as some focus group discussions, getting more to the next level of what works, what doesn't work, what helps something be built or not be built. And we also came to them with the various strategies and tools that could be considered. And we got great feedback. We spoke to the HBA twice, then we had a smaller developer stakeholder group. And really, of course, they were interested in incentives, like the idea of density bonuses, if they're well structured. We had conversations around, around the small scale homes and ideas around design standards and could they be scaled appropriately for smaller scaled homes. They do believe there's market demand for those smaller scale homes. And they were interested in some more conversations about use by right, to reducing the risk for them when they come with some of these products to the community. And they were also very interested in the expedited review process to really, again, that's time, money, that predictable process. In terms of the community, we were out there for several events in the fall and then most recently in March at the community open house. And as was mentioned, we had a big piece of that was getting feedback and also the educational piece around affordability in Thornton. What does it mean for different people, different incomes? What can they afford if they try not to be cost burdened and spend more than 30% of their income? And getting feedback on housing choice preferences. So different types of homes that maybe could be seen in Thornton. We had a lot of feedback on the cottage style homes, accessory dwelling units, smaller scale homes. Definitely a preference, of course, for the single family home, but then also that idea of maybe there are different ways that smaller single family homes could fit different generations. We did hear a lot of concern around the whole gamut of, life stages, young to old. How do I stay in the community? How do my kids stay in the community? And really wanting to think about other ways to do that, as well as concern, of course, around neighborhood fit and how to support some of that gentle density and thoughtful development in the community. So we had some great conversations and again, appreciate some of your presence in some of those events as well. And with that, I will pass it over to staff to go through some of the strategies.
Thanks, Carla. Again, Zach Noyes, Planner 2 with Long Range Planning. I'm going to go over our recommendations, our policy recommendations specifically. Before we get to that, I wanted to discuss how we've organized the 11 recommendations into policies, process improvements, and code amendments. So policies would provide formal direction and prioritization to staff, but exist outside of the city's development code. Whereas process improvements largely refer to how staff within city development prioritize different applications. And these process improvements are largely based around our efforts to align with Prop 123. And then code amendments will impact how the city's development code, Chapter 18, regulates different types of housing based on these recommendations. So we've organized them into these three categories, as well as the near-term, midterm, and long-term impacts. So the near term coincides again with the deadlines to meet our Prop 123 efforts, as well as the end of our contract with heirs to assist with this work. This is the next 3 to 4 months by June 30th. The midterm anticipated by the end of this calendar year includes the more complex development code amendments, which need a bit more time to develop and calibrate and make sure that all of the different components of Chapter 18 align with one another before using those amendments. And finally, programs requiring the highest degree of coordination across departments and divisions are anticipated to be implemented no later than next year. Moving on, we will jump into our first recommendation. It is a housing policy framework. So this is a policy. This document will have 3 main components. One, it will formally define different tiers of affordability and attainability, which will be used in all of the code updates and policy prioritizations. So this will likely include a top tier affordable category, which is applicable to deed restricted affordable housing. And second and third tiers relating to attainable for sale or for rent housing, either the 80%, 100%, 120% area median incomes. The second component will coordinate strategies across the city's comprehensive plan, our housing needs assessment, as well as the various spots we have addressing different components of housing affordability in the city and housing choice. And this is really to ensure that all of the different city staff working on different components of housing choice are efficiently using their time and implementing things in conjunction with one another. And finally, this policy framework will provide a decision-making and prioritization method for future policies, including the next couple that we'll get to, including land disposition and fee rebate programs. With that, we'll jump into our long-term policy considerations. But this one more accurately should be considered ongoing because our housing division already utilizes multiple federal and state financial incentives to create as well as maintain our affordable housing stock in the city. You see on the screen a variety of financial incentives, either federal or state. And we wanted to highlight that there are additional grants and loan programs available to the city to acquire land, preserve naturally occurring affordable housing. And we will continue to pursue these funding streams as opportunities and capacity allows us to. Our next recommendation is to leverage the publicly owned land the city already has. So this would establish a method for dispensing of city-owned land or creating long-term lease options where the city retains ownership to address the upfront costs associated with land acquisition for developing housing. So a land disposition policy would likely be made available only to the top tier affordable housing projects. And would require development agreements in coordination with city development, city's real property division, as well as our housing division. Because of this coordination, this policy is envisioned to be undertaken over the longer term, though implementation would be alignment with the housing policy framework mentioned a couple of slides ago. And our last policy recommendation regards fee rebates. So in coordination with the city's finance department, we've begun to identify monetary incentives related to the city's permit fees and materials use taxes. It is desired to provide these rebates as post-completion reimbursements so we can validate that a project demonstrates housing choice, either affordability or attainability. And with that, there would be an option to explore top-tier affordable housing projects from qualified nonprofits to have fee waivers before actually developing, which would reduce the upfront costs, but that would have to be fleshed out in the sort of policy establishment. And I will highlight here that we did review waivers or rebates to the utility and tap fees that the city requires. At this time, we're not recommending moving forward with these due to the complexity and legal requirements surrounding the enterprise fund structure of these. But we did look into them as a component of this housing choice project. That was a very quick overview of some of these policy considerations, and I'll hand it off to Aaron to talk about process improvements and code updates as part of this project.
Okay, thanks, Ben. I'm Erin Rogowski. I'm a current planner with the city. So our first process improvement is expected to be implemented near term and is largely driven by Proposition 123. An important component to Prop 123 is the idea of a fast-tracked permitting process for affordable housing projects. So this requirement establishes a 90-day maximum review time from the moment the city receives a complete application to the final decision of that application. And this is only for administrative reviews, so annexations and zonings are not required to work within this time frame. Usually our reviews are 3 to 5 weeks each, and that's just the city's scheduled review times. So that is in addition to the time the plans are being corrected by the applicant. So add in multiple rounds of review, which is often required, and this can result in months or even years before a final decision is made. So it's nearly impossible to meet this 90-day deadline without forming a new expedited review process. There are several ways we're looking at outlining this fast-tracked process for affordable housing. And the first and most important would be front-loading the pre-application plan making process, which just means working closely with the developers before they turn in a formal submittal, so that when we do receive that formal application and that 90-day clock starts, it's already a complete submittal and it requires little to no corrections. So followed by that front-loaded pre-application phase, our actual 90-day clock includes shorter review times, holding required public engagement early on to guide our detailed development, more interactive staff developer approach with the possibility of setting meetings instead of relying on written comment back and forth, potentially removing submittal requirements for certain application types to reduce redundancy in review, and creating special checklists for affordable housing projects. And finally, allowing a more concurrent review structure for the various steps of entitlement. So overall, this initiative will reduce delays in review times and help with the strict deadlines established in funding these affordable housing projects. So of course, with an expedited process, it usually requires staff who are able to expedite that process. And so that brings me to the next near-term process improvement, which is creating a dedicated affordable housing team. So this team would consist of members from several different divisions in city development, as well as possibly in other departments, who would act as the points of contact for top-tier affordable housing projects like Zach described earlier. Creating a go-to team allows for subject matter experts on things like the state and federal funding cycles, Prop 123 requirements, the future housing choice code, which we're working on right now, and the housing policy framework we wish to form. So ultimately, this will help to track our progress for the required 3% annual increase in affordable housing stock, and provide a smooth and rapid service for developers. Switching gears, now we'll talk about the second type of recommendation, that is amendments to the development code. So something we're exploring for the near term is more flexible design standards for affordable housing projects. So a lot of you might remember that during the recent code update, we made changes to the requirements for architecture for all different types of housing. And these standards guide the design of exterior building cladding, roof forms, window and door placement, garage placement, porch placement, a lot of other things. They also focus, especially for less dense products, on anti-monotony, which disallows the same exact house to be right next to itself or across the street from itself. As you can imagine, these regulations often make the residential design review very extensive and complicated. And especially for affordable housing, they have a direct impact on project feasibility and funding coordination. So this near-term goal considers reducing or eliminating some of the standards we see for market rate products while still maintaining the ability to guide building design. The next possible near-term code amendment would be incorporating the concept of a small-scale residential use type. In this consideration, staff would evaluate whether a new use type should be created or whether there should be separate dimensional standards for affordable housing projects where we could build on existing uses if they're in an affordable context. So the current development code does not regulate home size, and we aren't suggesting that we should change that. This small scale concept instead refers to exploring more flexible dimensional standards for affordable products, and that can include smaller lot sizes, especially for detached products, potentially smaller setback requirements, reduced minimum parking, and increased building heights. So ultimately, this would facilitate the development of smaller and denser products where appropriate. Moving on to a midterm code amendment, we've seen some other municipalities implement a density bonus program, and we think it might be practical for us to do the same to incentivize affordable housing. So a density bonus program allows for developers to exceed existing zoning limits that encourage greater density in exchange for real restricted affordable housing. Our current residential zone districts do not regulate density in that there are no minimums or maximums, but they do regulate other areas that indirectly impact density, like maximum building heights, minimum lot sizes and widths, and minimum building setbacks. So this density bonus program would be tied to the different affordability tiers and would incentivize development of smaller and denser product types. It would also be designed to target locations along corridors dense with resources, community nodes, and areas with infrastructure capacity. Our next midterm code amendment consideration would be to allow more housing types by right in our residential zone districts. So there are two uses that we're considering expanding. One is the small scale dwelling that I explained earlier. And the other is cottage housing. So for the small scale dwellings, we're considering allowing this by right in the residential mid-density, residential high density, and the mixed use districts. Then we would see if it makes sense to also potentially limit this use in the low density district while remaining sensitive to existing surrounding uses and neighborhoods and possibly restricting next to certain zone districts. In addition, the cottage housing use is currently allowed as a limited use in the residential low and residential mid-density districts. And the limited use standards restrict the number of dwelling units allowed per lot. So that directly impacts it. So
Councilmember Morris has a question.
Okay.
Just a quick question. On the RM, RH, MU, is there a max number of acres that we're looking at for small scale stuff? If it's like a, well, I guess we just apply to anything. If it's like a greenfield development.
No, there's not currently any max on like the size
Well,
of
so
a
let's say like, we have a 10-acre lot that's for sale and the developer says, I can at 1,000 square foot minimum lot size, I can build whatever, like 100, 1,000, whatever the math works out to. Tiny homes.
Mm-hmm.
From a community planning and perspective or like an aesthetics, it doesn't look like it doesn't seem like it would look right to have something that small and that large of an area. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering if we can put a maximum in like what that normal is for developments that might be like that. I understand like a master plan community where you have 500 homes coming in and maybe 10% of them are a certain size and they have like 1,000 square foot lot size and it mixes in with like your standard detached family and some other kind of paired home stuff. But if it's an entire neighborhood of 1,000 square foot minimum lot size on 10 acres, even 20 acres, I mean, I think we need to find where that max is.
Yeah, that's definitely something.
Based on how it would fit in the neighborhood context.
You want me to take that? So there is some language within code as well regarding a mix of different housing product types and considerations for doing that. So that way you don't get just one big neighborhood of micro or small scale housing or all of just duplex housing or things like that. So it creates some of that mix. So there is some language in code about some of that mix, and we can look at that and see if anything needs to change there based on this addition into some of those neighborhoods, because can definitely understand the concern. And
yeah, I don't want it to be, I imagine we wouldn't want it to be like an arbitrary number where now we're reacting to a developer asking for 100 acres of 1,000 square foot minimum or lot sizes. That just, then we're like, okay, what do we base it off of? What does that look like? Is that even a good decision in the future? So yeah, I think I would recommend we look at that and provide a recommendation or proposals to us to consider like what makes sense to add to that development mix as we're looking forward.
Yep. And just so council knows as well, like when some of these code recommendations or when we move forward with some of these, there'll be more substance around them in terms of where and opportunities and maybe what other things need to change to accommodate it, but also put some of those protections in place. Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Okay, so talking about cottage housing now, this use is allowed as a limited use in the residential low and residential mid-density districts. The limited use standards restrict this use by restricting the number of dwelling units allowed per lot. So we're considering allowing this use by right with no dwelling unit restrictions. Our final code amendment for the midterm would be to enhance the plan development overlay in relation to affordable housing projects. Currently, the code allows for plan development overlay districts to be established if they meet a number of required and elective objectives, and these PDOs can allow for alternative development and use standards. Affordability is already one of our elective objectives, but the requirements in the existing PDO language are general and don't align with the goals of the Housing Choice Code update. So we propose updating the PDO requirements to align with a tiered affordability in our future housing policy framework and specify the proportion of affordable housing units in the development to make it eligible for the PDO district. And I think the next one is Mike.
Thank you, Council. So as considerations have been discussed this evening, we are seeking consideration from Council on either to continue to pursue these policies and codes we're recommending for changes, or alternatively, the staff or direct staff not to move further in any actions. One thing I'd note too is if you'll see code changes coming this spring, late spring into summer, we're gonna have in addition to these housing choice code amendments, you'll be seeing, as you may have heard from developers, looking for small lot market rate products come along as well. So those will be coming out about the same time, but we'll make sure the distinctions are for housing choice versus market rate type of products. So there may be some differences in the size, setbacks and things along those lines, one versus another, but I just want to make sure that if you do hear people say that what about the other part? We are working through the other code amendments. They're part of the update of the code amendment we did back in September of last year. So, but from that, we're open to any questions or direction that council may have at this time. And
Okay, first we have questions from Councilmember Morris.
Great work so far, and it's a lot. And I do appreciate the direction and this the idea that hey, we're trying to make things easier to build certain things. One of the I guess I have a kind of a laundry list of questions, and I'll continue to have more because I'm very interested in real estate. And it it kind of defines how our city looks, and that's a pretty important thing. You mentioned not in the presentation, but in the notes in the council agenda where it talks about Prop 123, and it talks about achieving like a 3% growth in affordable housing. Where do we stand right now with affordable housing, and then what does that 3% number look like?
So we met with the DOLA, the Department of Local Affairs of the state, that was part of that, our commitment of 3%, 9% over 3 years of that meeting those goals. New construction wise, to be frank, we're not there. We haven't seen a lot of affordable housing projects that have been permitted to that date. We met with them, one of the aspects they're looking for, their criteria for approval is livability rehabbing homes. They did introduce that market rate homes that are built under the average, under 125% of the average area income, which ironically was up to $600,000 home qualified. So when we ran those numbers, we are within the realm of what the goals of that numbers, but we're not, if you're looking at 60% AMI, those type of products, we haven't seen that type of product. We did have the overlook apartments over in west of I-25 of 84th, those are rehabbed. Those came in, they were permitted right before this project happened, but that was a full rehab the maker did over on that apartment complex. And then before that, of course, Colorado and 104th, as both a senior and a market rate projects were built and constructed during that time that they're completed during the time we got our grants approved. So where we're positioned at with DOLA and their perspective, we are on track at this point from that perspective. But they do encourage us to try to get more market affordable housing projects, new projects on the ground as well. But
So the 3% increase note that you put in the agenda staff notes, that's already been met?
It's been, according to DOLA, we are on track with that. It's per year, it's a 3-year cycle on that. So that would be the first 2 years of the 3 years.
Okay, so is there a world where market rate is also affordable? Or are we always looking at them as two different things?
So the guidelines we got back from DOLA does allow for, to be honest, some of the homes that are being built up in even parterre are under that $600,000 mark under the DMI. So technically those are being met. Those are, I would consider as market rate. They're not specifically targeted as affordable, attainable housing.
Yeah.
Attainable, yes, affordable, probably not, in that whole spirit. But the guidelines we received back from DOLA is that we are on track based on those price points those homes are selling at.
Okay.
And rehab, so if you took a house, rehabbed it, real estate world, and it was earmarked for that lower price points, lower rent, rent, I think is 80% AMI for rent and then 125% purchase, you would get, this local government gets credit for those as well.
Okay. That's good
So-
to know.
So we have been tracking those as well as they come along.
Okay, awesome. I know on the side, there's like a task right now from earlier in the year where we talked about like what's in the pipeline. So I know that's kind of like a separate topic of discussion that's in the works. I know that's a pretty big ask to dig into that. But I am excited to see what we learn from that analysis. As far as when you start talking about increasing or expediting processes, that's amazing. Love that. Is there any reason why that's just not what we're doing for everything? And it doesn't have to be targeted just towards affordable housing projects?
Well, with our processing, we consider it a fast project in reality if you're looking at how other communities do it. The affordable Prop 123 is talking about a partnership between local development, local governments and the developers to work together to hit that 90 days, because there's two equations in that process. It's our review process and applicants' responsiveness to our process. So if one or both aren't partnering and have it, 90 days is not achievable. If we are or committed to it, that's an achievable timeline. The state looked at, when I became aware of this information in other industry as well, we were concerned, how do you even, for an annexation, for example, how do you take some of our processes and make them be 90 days with state regulations for notice? And so I think Josh mentioned earlier, it's really tiered back towards a permitting process. What's generally, most of our permitting process can be accomplished with our current regulations within 90 days. Aaron earmarked our review times. Ironically, we try to have projects done in 2 to 3 reviews cycles with the ask and with the applicant. But if you start expanding those out, our average times take 6 months plus waiting often we wait to hear back from applicants. And if we have any delays on our side, we won't work that. So these become great pilots for us. For affordable, for sure. How do we look at our other processes? We are always looking for ways of expediting all the processes we have, honestly.
So then my understanding is that right now we're talking about housing choice and like affordable housing as like the phrase, quote unquote. But really, our goal as a department or as a city is that they're equal. Like both affordable housing projects and market rate projects, we're trying to hit a 90-day timeframe. Is that?
If that was achievable, correct. But what we're talking about this is we'd actually have a team that would be dedicated towards affordable housing projects. We could look at other processes as well. And part of that is I think the long-term goal would be, yeah, let's see if we can get there with the development community in general and say, how do we partner every year? Most of our projects, especially permits. I mean, there are other projects for various reasons we can't notice things like that will just be challenging to ever meet those kind of deadlines. But how do we get there? And that's the partnership we're working with developers on all the time on how do we make that a quicker process with better communication. But if we pilot, call it pilot with affordable housing, is there lessons learned that we can implement in our regular review processes? The answer is hopefully yes.
That's great. Thank you I'm working through my questions, so thank you. As they've been kind of coming to mind. Yeah. Is there I think we've talked about this before, maybe on one-on-one conversation, but are we looking at looking at the process, the approval process, are we looking at large developers versus small single owner developers the same, or are we doing things differently in terms of like how that process looks? Because I know that there's a lot that comes with costs and time that because of economies of scale, like for a small one-person owner, can financially like ruin them versus like a national builder where, you know, they have that size to be able to absorb the process that we currently have in the city. And it's not as bad for them, even though they don't like it. Or is that a part of the conversation? Like, are we expediting? Are we looking at, because I'm also bringing this up to the point of if we're building affordable housing stock, and a lot of this stuff, we talk about middle housing or middle market housing, this is all like infill opportunity. Again, because a small builder isn't going to build on a big acreage property typically. They're going to look at these small vacant lots that we have within the city, throughout the city, and they're going to say, hey, I can put a triplex on this property based on these new rules, or a duplex. Is that process different than a greenfield expansion? And can it be? And as the experts, it doesn't make sense to do it that way or to look at it that way.
I can answer this, or try to at least to attempt to answer this question. So the answer is we've talked to small builders and large builders, just the gamut of what we've heard. Impediments for the whole small building industry, at least walking their doors into Thornton, is finding available lots to build on. The national builders have a tendency to take up the big development, so there's not an excess land sitting out there for them to build on. That's impediment one. One element we're looking at too, and we've talked to some smaller builders, affordable housing builders, I'll use them as an example of folks we talked to. They're very interested in like land bank property the city may have excess of. That's something they've inquire about, either the city owns or the TDA owns or whatever resources owns, because that's an opportunity for them to partner, and other Prop 123 money is available for land banking developments as well. Infill is always challenging, especially the infrastructure needed, unplatted lots, things along those lines. But to be honest, we're treating everybody the same when it comes to this project. So if it's a small builder wanting to do a project with us, we're going to help them just like we help anybody else out. It's how can you, what land, is it zoned appropriately? What's comp plan say? Resources, financial resources that may be available to folks. We try to make sure they understand where those are at so they could go after projects like that. But yeah, there are some barriers, but there's also some opportunities at the same time for folks to do projects like they're saying. We are trying to, when we had discussions, we talked to some of the builders who don't build in Thornton at all. Their number one issue is either A, they have a project going on somewhere else where they're tied up on, or B, there's available land just isn't there for them to do without a ton of infrastructure improvements they'd have to do. So when you have those cost barriers of having to put those improvements in, which they're required to by city code, it makes it harder to deliver affordable projects from their perspective. So,
and I think that's what I'm getting at, is that we say as a city council, like we want these things, these certain types of housing, and we want it to be mixed into the neighborhoods where possible. Yet our system and our process prevents us from attracting those things from happening and even making a reality, because we say things are too expensive or permit the fees or whatever. And so what I'm asking is like, is there a way that we look at that so that we build a system around to create the result that we want. And so if that looks different than what the big builders are doing on a 20-acre lot, that's great. Like, how do we do that? And if that's not part of the discussion, I would recommend that we ask that to be a part of it, so that we are helping attract and creating the environment that those things can actually happen in. Because again, if we keep hearing these things, and that's the challenge, we have the ability to change code and processes and whatever. Like, let us know, like, sign off, you know? So, and I guess that the mindset here is like, how can we be more aggressive in that to create these vision, these goals, or to achieve these things? And if that's the way, I'd be all about it.
So I think I appreciate, and I think what I'm understanding the interest in thinking about incentives and barriers for infill development that would fulfill goals. I think that this project does have some funding tied specifically to some of these affordability objectives. I think we can figure out what's the right place for that more detailed analysis of barriers to infill development might live. I think part of the reason in some of these policy choices that we're talking about with regard to affordable housing is there's an inherent public benefit that comes with affordable housing. And so if we return fees, or if we reduce standards, that's in exchange for a public benefit. We'd have to think about similar kinds of constructs if there were differing standards and infill. Not to say that it couldn't happen, but I think it would take a different kind of policy analysis. I think, not to step on the toes of our consultants here, but I think it might be better targeted. I think it might be challenging to force that policy objective into this frame.
That makes sense. Because I know we're talking specifically about the affordable housing route. But if we can, as we're looking at the market rate stuff, and we're looking at process, and we're continuing to aggressively adjust development code to meet what we want, I think that needs to be a part of the discussion. And so I hope everyone else would be in agreement that we should look at that as part of that process. On the design standard side, I know you mentioned as we reduce design standards of public good. My take is that there should be an opposite approach to that. I feel like that's where a lot of the pushback comes from the community, is when buildings look uglier than they need to look, or they don't age well because of the lowering of design standards on these buildings. If we want there to be a community to embrace it and to be a value add to our community and to the residents, frankly, the most important person in that building is make it a beautiful building. Let's require that we find a way for them to make it a beautiful building that just improves the area around it. So that's going to be the one place where I think, based on where the code is right now, and like what you propose, that I will say we should change that outlook, and we shouldn't lower the standards on design.
So one thing I would just say quick with that, I think the terminology is a little tough because it doesn't fully just mean reducing design standards, but more or less kind of right sizing them to the product as well. Or in some cases where the code might say, thou shall include 4 of these elements. Maybe for a small scale house, 4 of those elements are overly substantial, where 3 are maybe more appropriate for the scale and context of some of those products. So that's kind of one thing we're looking at with that in conversations with builders, developers, because we've heard that before too, with talking to them. It's like, we don't want to promote the notion of cheap, right? Because that's the opposite of what we're all trying to do, moving past 1960s, 70s housing product types. So we're looking at more of how do we scale the design requirements to the product types being proposed or considered, and then also making sure that if there's an alternative to that design standard, a lot of times with building articulation and elements like that, if you, certain things you can move and it doesn't really increase cost, but if you move some other things because of new headers or, you know, beams that have to go in, it can substantially drive up the cost. So we're kind of looking at those different variables with some of those. So I
understand that.
appreciate that concern.
I do appreciate the feedback there. I see a lot of houses and I've been in a lot of neighborhoods around the Denver metro area. And what happened in Denver is that Denver became very excited about a certain type of product and builders found the right pro forma and they all recreated it over and over and over until at some point the city said, whoa, we have to stop. We can't allow any more of this type of development to happen because the residents are literally complaining about it because it all looks like the same product type, even though they weren't next door to each other. It was all the same, like, you know, box, you know, 3-level, you know, over and over and over and over throughout all these neighborhoods where they were doing all this infill development. And so that's the idea, like there's the building, I think the picture that you have on the graph or on the presentation at the beginning, even that, like the exterior, I'm like, what did we do with the, like the way the window design is? It's all flat, you know, and it makes it look cheap. And so there are things I think that we need to look at in design to make things more attractive in our city. And I think we could push for the builders to become more creative in how they achieve that, even though they're going to push back and say, we don't want to do it because it's too expensive. So I'm going to push back on it because I think we just need to challenge that notion a little bit to see what else comes out of it so that we don't find ourselves in a situation where like, whoa, what did we do? We allowed all these things to come in. Now look at the way our city looks. Look at all these developments and they all either look the same or they're not aging well after 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is, because we let poor design happen up front or poor exterior appearance. So what am I asking with that? Can we look at, maybe we don't look at this lowering design standards. How about that? Just start.
Does anybody else have thoughts on that?
I mean, I still have questions, but I was letting his Shakespearean monologue finish first.
Yeah. What about Councilmember Morris's request to ignore design standards? I think that there are some, I think that he made some good points. We want to keep good buildings. We want to make them attractive, regardless of whether they're affordable or not. But I do think that when my conversations with the HBA developer community is, you know, those design standards do get in the way of some of the projects that they want to do that are targeted towards attainability. So I think there needs to be some kind of middle ground. So I don't necessarily say we should take design standards off the table, but I do agree that we should be cognizant of that and not be, you know, willing to completely abandon them. I'd like your point about, you know, if there was 4 standards that need to be met, but really 3 will do. I mean, I think that's kind of we need to optimize. Because I know for a fact from the conversations that I've had with these developers that overly ambitious design standards for projects that are attainable, missing middle, do they impede that they look for other communities, you know, other communities will win out on that. So I think they're good points, but I don't think we should go to the full extreme of taking those off the table.
I think you misunderstood me. The proposal is that we reduce design standards to make it easier. I'm saying we don't reduce design standards. We expect a certain level of appearance. You know, there are things that we don't want to recreate over and over that can very easily happen as we allow things to be built and we're expediting processes, more things are coming into the pipeline. We can find ourselves very quickly in a 2-year time frame looking at the properties and wondering, oh wow, what did we miss here? Yeah, why do they look like this? Because I know we don't really have a say in design, like we're not approving things based on how they look, and that's unfortunate in some capacity. But I know that's kind of part of the administrative review, or at least part of how we've expedited things or improved things. So that's all I'm saying is like, it's not the expectation that we're gonna just be okay with like, hey, lower the design standard because it's cheaper and easier to come through. I think that our community deserves more. We deserve a beautiful community, no matter what type of housing it is, no matter what that, that cost is. So I don't know how to translate that into like a policy element on like, how do we adjust this? Maybe it's just getting more recommendations from planning on, here's what we could do to kind of alleviate that concern, and then we can talk about it. Maybe that's
what I was thinking is we could give you something to react to
yeah.
and take a light touch to it first, present what that could look like. And then obviously that's entirely for council to hear at that point.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I was saying, I don't think all design standard reductions are equal. And I think if we can identify the ones that have the lowest impact to aesthetics, but also have the highest impact to the bottom line of the developers, those are the ones that we wanna target. So if we can do that, as far as, I guess we're not really adopting a plan yet, but that would be feedback when it comes to design standards, is try to figure out what are the ones that are really the hangups for developers, and what are the ones that are like, how can we rank them in preferences among the community. That's probably hard to do, but if we could do that, that would be very helpful. Yeah.
It sounds like it's an overall interest, so, yeah, if we can get some information on that. Are there any other questions from you, Councilmember Morris?
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you guys for
Okay.
working with me on that.
I have some.
Well, Councilmember Martinez is next.
Okay. Thank you.
Couple of questions. One was about the statement of utility tap fee waivers not recommended due to enterprise structure and potential fiscal and infrastructure impacts. I understand that waivers are off the table, but from the conversations I've had about what are some of the big impediments to smaller footprint homes is the tap fee structure overall. So instead of a waiver, has there been any conversations about how they're structured in terms of scaling fees to the size of the lot? That is a common theme that you hear when you talk to developers of what gets in the way of them building products like cottage homes or smaller lots, is that the economics just don't pencil out when you have tap fees that are flat across lot size. So is that something that was considered?
So that is being evaluated as part of, or is one of the suggestions the council considers looking at the fee structure. Certainly, we've had those discussions about tiered, a lower tier based on a small lot. You end up subtracting out most or all the outdoor water anyways, right? The other option is a rebate system. I think earlier in the presentation, we talked about after they've demonstrated that it is truly affordable housing, meets some of the requirements, and you would look at some type of rebate. But these are all have to be explored, and obviously council have discussions about how water sits in an enterprise fund and how does that get made whole or doesn't get whole. Those are discussions that we'd have if that's an interest to council look at, because we've heard that as well, the development community, that is an impediment, is cost. The fees, the building fees, all those fees add up to the cost to make it, especially trying to do affordable housing. So we'd certainly investigate those more if that's a direction council wants to go with on that aspect of it. But yeah, those discussions have been had.
Yeah, okay, great. I'd absolutely ask for consensus that we make that one of the priorities of this ongoing work, is to identify the structures that and how they are currently disincentivizing the development that we're looking for, and how we might be able to restructure those in a way that meets our legal requirements of the enterprise fund, but also can provide the proper incentives to build these smaller footprint products. So I think that's a critical piece of there.
Does anybody have any concerns about that?
No, I totally agree with Councilmember Martinez. That goes along with the point of, are we looking at small builders differently? And where can we make adjustments to make it achievable? So it's great.
I do have one more question, and it's about, other communities around the state have used tools that we, like, for example, revolving loan funds. Steamboat is a great example of how they build workforce housing using a revolving loan fund to help augment the, capital stack of these developers, looking at lower interest rates or, ways to partially finance their project in a way that gives them advantage when we're incentivizing the right kind of product. Is that I'd like to see, go down that path, see what kind of, have our team, look at what options we might have with existing funds and even put on the table the different options for going out to the community and asking what their appetite for a ballot measure on a revolving loan fund like that is. It's not something that is unprecedented. It's something that's happened in many communities throughout the state, and I think it's something that we should look at as well. Ultimately, it would be up to the council. I mean, it could be up to the voters, but I don't think we should leave any stone unturned when we're looking at ways to solve or ways to help alleviate this housing crisis. So that would be another ask that I would have, is that we look at what other communities have done regarding revolving loan funds, ballot measures, those types of things. Honestly, there's a lot of different potential, but of course, it's up to the voters on some of these things. So I'd like to see what our options are on that.
Does anybody have any concerns about those? Okay. Did you have any other questions?
That was it.
Councilmember Byrd?
I actually had questions that were not related to money, but Drew took them. So I do have, I do have one. How does the notice process work with Proposition 123, since it's gonna be an expedited process? Because I know one of the things that residents have lots of feelings about is being notified when something like this is being built next to them.
That's a great question on the notice. There's nothing directly in Prop 123 about notice of residents. That'd be something we were suggesting that is part of the process, that there'd be some type of notice prior to issues of building permits, things along that. We call it development plans in the development world. So there'd be a notice. There already is in the code that way as well, an option of a neighborhood needing even with the development permit. So we could have that element in there embedded with that as well. When we get to the code, that's where we'd have more discussions about that, how that process would work. It is a little tricky, 90 days and still have those community meetings and have them meaningful. Aaron mentioned earlier, having some of that stuff front loaded before they submit may be an element that we'd have to look into to see, make sure the public is heard, and if there's opportunities for modification to an application, that would help a ton with keeping it within those 90 days. So we'll have to kind of fine tune that and how that all play out, but we do think it's super important that the community is aware of projects going along. But at the end of the day, there's no notice that the state's really calling out on the Prop 123 requirements.
Okay. I agree with Councilmember Morris about the design standards. I don't think we should reduce them in the sense of we end up with the same brick square buildings on every corner. So that's something that I would definitely want us to review and look into. It sounds like a lot of the process and kind of ideas around this is really complying with Proposition 123 and trying to push for getting those grants. As Councilmember Algie stated earlier, we're in a state with a $1.5 billion debt. Do we actually expect to get any grants by changing anything of this process because the state doesn't have any money?
What we've heard to date is that so far the answer is yes, we've heard that money would be available if we meet the June 30th. It's only for the expedited process. The rest of it, The rest of what we're talking about, it doesn't have to be done by that date. Up to $45,000 is the amount for that. Early as last week, I still heard that money still available. It's sitting in a different pot because that's a money that was reserved through voters initiative back 4 or 5 years ago at this point. Could change. I can't guarantee that money, but as of right now, we're told that's still available at this point.
I want to be clear, when it comes to any of the state mandates, we're evaluating these policies through the priorities of Thornton and goals of Thornton. So if we felt that any of the things under Prop 123 were inconsistent with our goals and objectives, we would certainly pull that out for discussion with the council. So want to be really clear that I don't think necessarily the grant is fueling these. It's the underlying policy objectives of increasing affordable housing, which is guiding these recommendations.
There's certain policies and implementations that you guys have in here that I'm 100% for. One of the ones that's like I have been a big advocate on is the smaller home dwellings. I think that's a great idea. I think that what they did with a villa over here, a Villa Eastlake, I think that's a great concept. And if we turn it into something where people can buy it instead of rent it, I think that's amazing. The areas I don't like, specifically around things like with the policy of giving land away for free, I think that's a horrible idea. The no cost for the building out or selling the land for a lower cost, I think that's something that we should definitely evaluate and look into deeper. I think the city needs to take full advantage of the land stuff that we're sitting on. And given the general vicinity of things around here, Thornton has the most land and the most resources to build on, so there's not really a real big push for us to offer it for free to anybody. So that's my opinion on it.
Councilmember Algie?
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Great presentation as always. I'm in agreement with my colleagues, with, Councilmember Morris, Councilmember Martinez, Councilmember Byrd, the design standards, I think we need to look at. Short term, we want to get workforce sustainable housing built and get these folks in there. And obviously the aesthetic portion is where we don't want a cookie cutter, right? But there's also a long-term perspective too, and that's the appreciation of the housing stock. So that way folks can not only get into affordable housing, then they're building wealth, the American dream per se, right? Which has been, for most of us, is not there, right? And that's what we're trying to do, is to bring that back. So that's part of the picture too, is the appreciation factor long term. But obviously we have to get there first, that's why, we did this. And I thank you all for the efforts, the one-on-one meetings. It's really great. So that's all I have. Thank you.
So, we go back to the last slide we had in the presentation. So it looks like we have,
Put that
we had
one
like-
more, I
yeah, I
think,
think we
so
had-
questions.
Oh, yep.
yeah, requesting. Okay, so do we have consensus to move forward with directing staff to pursue the policy and code changes?
As long as they incorporate the feedback.
The feedback.
Yeah,
that-
and incorporate
with
the feedback,
with
yeah.
The feedback that was
Yes.
given
Design standards, yes.
specifically around aesthetics. Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next we have a discussion regarding an amendment to the bylaws of the Thornton Arts, Sciences and Communities Council, Tachco, Inc. of the city of Thornton. And then after this, we'll take a short restroom break.
Erica Delaney Lou from the City Attorney's Office, Lisa Zimmerman from Parks, Recreation and Cultural Resources. You're gonna join us, and compared to the last two presentations, this one's gonna be straightforward and short.
Don't challenge Drew.
The staff's presentation.
Well, thank you and good evening. Mayor Pro Tem and Council, Lisa Zimmerman, Arts and Culture Manager, here with Erica Billy, Senior Attorney. Tonight, we're going to provide information on the proposed Fifth Amendment to the Tashco bylaws. First, we'd like to just provide some background information, some context as to why we're making this proposal, then the actual bylaws amendment, and then what we recommend. Some of you may know that Tashco was formed a long time ago, decades ago, as a nonprofit corporation to assist the city in further chances of receiving scientific and cultural facilities district funding as a pass-through organization from the Adams County Cultural Council. And at that time, the Articles of Incorporation provided that members of council are the governing body, and that Tashco will be governed by a board of directors appointed by the governing body. Initially, the city council served in both of those functions, but then in 2007, the members voted to install a citizen board of directors, appointing initially 5 members, which now number 12 and represent all the city wards. The bylaws of Tashco have been amended 4 times since they were restated and reenacted in March 2007 to clearly delineate roles and responsibilities of the members, city council, and the newly appointed citizen board of directors as times and needs changed. Article 10 committee remained the same until 2 years ago, May 2024, when it was amended to subcommittees, and new language was added to make it easier for subcommittees to plan and execute new community events initiated by the board of director members. And these new events were Juneteenth, Pride, Dino Fest, and Dia de los Muertos. With those 4 events added to the calendar of Tashco, the pace and magnitude of the workload on the Tashco Board of Directors and limited arts and culture staff in executing these 4 growing community events raised the issue of the roles and responsibilities of board subcommittees and staff with respect to member participation, planning, and presentation of these annual events. The Tashco Board of Directors and city staff held 2 Saturday retreats in 2025 to discuss historic roles, existing and desired roles and responsibilities of subcommittees, the board, and staff with respect to planning and presenting these events. The desired outcome from those retreats was to allow Tashco subcommittees to provide direct guidance and feedback to staff in annual event planning and execution. The proposed bylaw amendment to Article 10 aligns with this goal. On August 11, 2025, Tashco voted unanimously to recommend these changes for Article 10 of the bylaws to reflect the board's advisory role, with staff assuming more responsibility for scheduling subcommittee meetings, listening to feedback from members, and then able to apply those in a timely manner to actually plan and execute the events. And this is what the new language looks like for recommended Article 10, Board of Directors defining secretary being staff, scheduling subcommittee meetings and publicizing that information. Notice of those committee meetings, as well as subcommittees, may include both board of director participation and participation by other Thornton community residents, which has been very helpful in executing these events, and that the chair or vice chair of the subcommittee shall provide written oral reports, which they currently do to the board of directors at its regularly scheduled meetings, and that subcommittee meetings are not subject to the attendance or compensation provision of the bylaws. In addition to Article 10, it arose also in November some requested changes to other parts of the bylaws, reducing the total number of absences of a board member in a calendar year due to a lot of absenteeism from the board, and to notify the board chair and city staff of the intention to participate virtually in scheduled meetings, so we have hybrid meetings once a month. December 8th, these 2 options were presented regarding meeting absences and virtual participation. The board decided to limit the number of total absences per year to 3 meetings or 25% of the regular meetings, while still allowing 2 meetings to be virtually attended. And that's been really helpful for the board members. An additional proposed revision clarifies language regarding non-compensation of ex officio Tashco members, such as VTAC members and anything members or representatives. So at the December 8th meeting, Tashco voted to recommend these proposed changes to sections 4.4, 6.8, and 6.10 of the bylaws to council. So at this time, staff and the Tashco Board of Directors recommend moving the Fifth Amendment forward for formal action on March 31st by the voting members of Tashco as represented by council. Do you have any questions?
Anybody have any questions at all? Well, I guess it would be me, because I'm the Tashko nerd. I think just my biggest question looking at some of the, can you go back a slide? I was thinking about this and visiting the new Ayler open space and seeing Maria Mayo again and wondering if we had the ex officio members from BTAC and anything on the Tashko.
We actually have anything. We have a
Okay.
new member.
Awesome.
Ashley, she's the new, I think, manager of outreach for the library. So she's been at every meeting since the fall, October.
Have we been able to get a BTAC
No, we haven't.
person? Okay. What do you think it would take, or what support could we offer to?
I think probably something that they would have in common with Tashko. It's possible from the new strategic plan goals in terms of incorporating more arts in the community, both in terms of gathering spaces, that type of thing. There might be a role for BTAC to play as a guest member or guest attendee and to present, and for us, for Tashko and or staff to present at BTAC. But right now, I don't know that there exists anything that might interest the BTAC group.
We can certainly reach out to BTAC.
Yeah.
I think sponsorship of city events is
Yes,
another
that
key
was
way
the one
that the
thing.
two things could tie in
True.
together, so.
We did work
Yeah.
with them on Dia de los Muertos to get more vendors that were part of the BTAC group, and that did help a year ago.
Yeah, I've talked to the council here, maybe the old council more, but and I've talked to Tansy about some ideas around like beautification of our more urban areas, specifically in Ward 1, 2. Like, what would that look like to have BTAC members involved so that we can start to cultivate some of those efforts, like thinking about commercial spaces in other cities that have more murals and things like that. I think it definitely supports like some of the goals we might have around economic development. So just looking at that, I think it is definitely aligns with, I think, the strategic plan, the strategic goals that we have. But furthermore, like, I think that connection, because we tried to make that connection so many times with Tashko, and then we would go to a meeting, and I don't know if we ever had anybody come from BTAC to Tashko. And I definitely think there's some places to align there. So
I think you're right. Incorrect. We have some spot teams actually that are looking at special gathering places and other enhancements that small businesses can make as a group. So I know there's interest there. There's also another spot team that's looking at arts and culture amenities, be they murals or other decorative facades for both small and large businesses. So I think there are a lot that are pointing in that direction. And if we are able to have BTAC present at one of our meetings, we'll go present to them in line with those efforts. And I think that would be certainly fortuitous.
yeah, and can we go back to the actual policy change in question?
About the subcommittees.
Yeah. Do we have the old language, or is this just a new?
I believe you have the red line in your packet.
In the
but I don't
packet,
have it on
okay.
the slide.
I didn't have it in the slide, okay.
Oh, I might have. I'll wait a little bit, see if it wants to go forward.
Or if you could just tell me like what the spirit was of the major change of this policy?
To summarize the spirit of the change, it's a couple years ago, we tried to go and look at all of our advisory boards and commissions and standardize the language. Subcommittees was really the most relevant with regard to Tashko, being the only body that really created a lot of subcommittees and really used them. But we tried to come up with standardized language, and how that wasn't really working for Tashko, meeting once a month. Those subcommittees, as an event gets closer, they can meet 2 times, 3 times leading up to the event. And without being able to just say, hey, yes, that's the band we want. Hey, yes, those are the food trucks we want, to staff, they were supposed to, by the old language, come back to the whole board and have the whole board say yes. And so the spirit of this change is really to make it more direct subcommittee engagement to staff, saying, hey, these are the bands, these are the food trucks. This is what we'd like to see and have you book.
Okay.
With regards to the attendance, it was sort of the same way. how we tried to standardize the attendance bylaws were, I think you couldn't miss 3 consecutive or more than 50% of the meetings. Some boards only meet 4 times a year. Some boards some boards meet less frequently. And when you had that 50% cap, what was happening is they wouldn't reach the 3 consecutive meetings problem. But the Tashco Board of Directors felt like they expect amongst themselves to be there more than 6 meetings out of 12. And fair enough, like that's why they're recommending this change and why it's being moved down to 3.
No, they do a lot of work, and I was on many of those I chaired many of them, so I know it's at the end of it, getting to the date of the event, it's a nightmare, so that's makes a lot of sense. All right, thank you. Yeah, I just had those few questions. Thank you.
Do you have a quick?
Morris has a question.
Thanks for mentioning the BTAC element. I was on BTAC for 6 years, and I don't ever remember a time that we had the opportunity to come sit in a meeting. So maybe there was just miscommunication, an opportunity there, a gap or something. But I would love to see that, because there were many times where we talked about, wow, it'd be really cool if we could talk to Tashco about murals. Like, how do we enhance some of these commercial spaces that are underutilized, especially in like Old East Lake, for example, or the grain elevator, or just Glamorous Farms, all these different places that there's the opportunity to put public art. So I would love to see that. Love to see that cross communication happen.
Thank you.
And it's in the bylaws that we have an ex officio person on there, but it just wasn't happening.
BTAC doesn't know.
Yeah. All right, and Councilmember Algie.
Yeah, Lisa, great job as always with Tashco, and great presentation. Of course, I'm a Tashco past member as well, so I'm supporting this, obviously. I like the meeting attendance. That really helped, because I had to not renew my term because I had family situation going on. I was starting to miss meetings because we had to be in person at the time, and I felt, we needed someone else to come in since I was unable to do it. And I think the person that replaced me is in the audience tonight, so thank you, Stacy, saying you're doing a great job. But still, I didn't want to be a burden on the city, but now with this helps. This is over the course of the year. You can do 2 virtual. There's a regular, then 3, and then have the 3 absences. So this is definitely a positive. I also like the BTAC component as well. And that's a new thing, obviously. And I have a couple people in mind, but as a council member, I'm not gonna be the one to recommend. It's gonna be up to whoever's on BTAC and up to Tashco to make that decision who the ex officio member is. But they're all great people. I got to know them very well, ever since I left Tashco, and then here I am as a result. So once again, great job, and I can't say enough good things about you guys. Thanks.
All right, does anybody else have any questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll take a short 5-minute break, restrooms, and then we'll get back to this.
Oh, you're just running things.
Okay, so now we have the 2026 legislative update.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, Council. Peggy is online. Peggy, can you hear us?
I sure can. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you. So tonight is actually a follow-up to the discussion that we had 2 weeks ago that was very shortened. So I think per council's request, we're back kind of covering the same update that we provided before. So our friends, Commander Connors is here, as well as Deputy City Attorney Adam Stevens, to talk about public safety bills, and then we've got a couple other on data centers that we want to highlight. Before we get to those, these are the bills that you currently weighed in on. We did not intend to go through these one by one tonight. We do also have an update, a regularly scheduled update next week, so we'll have an opportunity next week to talk about bills. But I did want to give Peggy an opportunity, if there's any highlights from a process standpoint on any of these bills, Peggy, that you want to share with council.
Sure. Yeah. Happy to jump in there. Just kind of generally to give you a taste of where we are in the session, we've got about 51 days left. Over 500 bills have been introduced, We do expect another large tranche of bills at the beginning of April. Those will be the final long bill, budget bill, as well as the orbital bills that are associated with the budget bill. As you know, the recent revenue forecast showed that the state was $1.5 billion in the hole. This set the Joint Budget Committee back a little bit. So they are working on finalizing the budget and trying to fill that hole. The budget will be introduced. It was supposed to be introduced this week. It will get pushed back to the week of April 5th, starting in the House, and then we'll move to the Senate. The governor, I think, is using this as an opportunity to continue to push for that Pinnacle spinoff. House Democratic leadership told me last night that they think this is a pretty tough pill to swallow for their caucus, and it's unlikely to be accepted. So more to come on the budget, but it is going to be a big, ugly couple weeks when we start that. Just a couple updates on the bills that we have been following. House Bill 1001, which is the Home Act, is on its way to the governor. Kind of in that same vein, minimum lot sizes 1114 passed the House and was introduced in the Senate. It has not been calendared. 1145, the mobile home water quality legislation is in committee on Thursday, and we're supporting that bill. 1138, retail theft, passed this evening out of House Judiciary 9-2. And then the next two bills that we've got on the agenda are Senate Bill 70 and 71. We've talked about these a few times, but I know Council wanted to go into a little bit more depth on those bills. Just as a refresher, Senate Bill 70, and I might add 1037 to this group of bills as well. They're kind of all in the same vein. Senate Bill 70 was the legislation that was really honed in on license plate readers, and it prohibited government entities from accessing databases containing historic location information. The bill was amended in committee to tighten up some of the language around how long law enforcement can retain that information, and also changed the timing to 72 hours. And after 72 hours, a warrant must be obtained by law enforcement to use this tool. It's really kind of that piece that I think a lot of concern lies around the bill, because oftentimes it is, in fact, this sort of information that helps build probable cause and builds a case. So it's almost the cart coming before the horse, really. And I don't know if at this point you want me to kind of turn it over to folks there, Rob, or should I keep
Yeah.
going through? Okay, perfect.
No, let's pause there. So, if council recall, 2 weeks ago, Chief Reeves was here and provided you an overview of 70, which Peggy was just talking about, 71, and then 1037. Chief Reeves is out on a pre-scheduled vacation. I don't know who approved that during the legislative session. So he's not here. He's, I don't know where, but we're grateful to have Commander Connors here. We weren't going to repeat that presentation, but we are happy to answer any questions. Right now, you're in amend position on 70, and my understanding, and Peggy, you can please correct me, but 71 we don't think will really move forward at this point, and it looks likely for 1037 as well. The odds are long on those bills. Is that still the case, Peggy?
Yeah, that's right. 70 has a bit of, it's got a $2 million fiscal note, so that's sitting in appropriations and has a tough road ahead as well. 71, you are correct. They laid over in Judiciary Committee And as we talked about, they may be trying to keep that title available if they need it. So that one's just kind of sitting in limbo, as is 1037, which is in the House Judiciary Committee laid over. So those are all kind of in limbo at this point.
Thanks. So I know council had expressed an interest in potentially talking or learning more about these bills. So again, we're hopefully what Chief Reeves, the information he shared 2 weeks ago was useful. Again, we're here to answer any questions if you have it about or if you want to discuss taking a different position on any of these bills. I'm happy to take your feedback. And then we got a couple that we'd like to talk after these public safety bills.
Councilor Morris.
Related to the 70 and 71. Is there, so we have like a, what is it, amend and a monitor position on these. What I would ask our council is to look at these two bills as kind of like look at it in a kind of home rule mentality perspective. And what I mean is, I don't agree that there are things that should be adjusted or amended internally. There's always room for improvement in how we do things. I think we should oppose these two bills because this takes away our ability to implement our own procedures and make and do and create what's best based on what our police department and staff all kind of agree makes the most sense for our needs for our city. So, in light of that kind of perspective, I would recommend we at least oppose it for those reasonings. So, open to discussion.
Does anybody else have any thoughts on it? Yes, Councilman.
I'd rather keep our position as amend. I think there's amendments that we could advocate for that would make this a better bill for not just Thornton, but everybody. So I'm going to oppose. I think that closes off our ability to have a more meaningful conversation with the legislators on how we can make this bill better, especially if we anticipate it moving forward, that we want to have a seat at the table.
Anybody else have any thoughts? Right now we're at amend, correct?
Yes.
I agree with Councilmember Morris as far as it prohibits us from a municipal level of being able to control a lot more of this. I get what you're saying, Councilmember Martinez, about sitting at the table as well, but my suggestion at that point then would be that the amendment would be basically really difficult without being in an opposed state. We still have the amend there, but we pushed it out to 365 days instead of 30 days, and then see how much pushback they get off of that.
Anybody else? We have Martinez at amend. Councilmember Salazar, what's your position? No. Stay exactly where we are. Algie?
Yeah. For now, I mean, I get, for both Councilmember Martinez and also from Councilmember Burton Morris, but still, with the conversation we're having in community right now, I think we need to stay at amend for the moment. We'll see what happens at the next time. Obviously I don't want to impede law enforcement from doing their job, but still, I think we need to get, all aspects from both sides on this. So I think right now we should stay at amend.
Okay.
I would take a opposed position.
Okay. So I will stay with amend at this time. So we'll keep it there.
We can, as Peggy noted, it's got a pretty big fiscal note in the city appropriation.
Yeah.
So we can continue to provide you updates on where it is from a process standpoint. Any other questions or discussions on the public safety bills before we move on to the data? We've got a couple of data center bills.
Got a quick question, not on the public safety, but just backing up to the housing on qualifying properties. That's headed to the governor's office. Is that something that are we expecting there to be some sort of legal action that's gonna be taken in the state by cities? Are we hearing anything about that?
I'm sorry, you're talking about the 1001, the home, okay. I'm not aware.
I'm not aware.
Peggy, are you aware? Did you hear that question?
If there is legal action expected on 1001,
Right, is it something that is gonna trigger, because this is obviously a direct affront to home rule. So it's already talked about it since it passed Senate and House, like, okay, well, I guess the next fight is the actual legality of the bill if it gets signed by the governor.
Yeah, I'm not aware. Peggy, are you aware of anything?
I have not heard anything to that end, but you know, you all may have better information with discussions with CML as to whether there's a lawsuit expected.
I can follow up with CMO, but usually they may not know at this time if they have a coalition to make a legal challenge, but I can follow up and let you know.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks. Thanks for your contribution. Okay, so there were there were a couple other bills that you specifically asked for information on. Two data center bills, and they kind of do different things. So the first one is 1030 data center and utility modernization. This is really kind of an incentive program through the state. The second one is Senate Bill 102, which is actually the opposite, is more of a regulatory increased regulation on data centers. So kind of doing different things. We've looked at both bills, city development tie, from what we've looked at from a development standpoint. Emily's looked at it from a water standpoint, and economic development. Adam has looked at it from a development standpoint. From a city process standpoint, we don't have significant concerns about either of these bills. The incentive bill, provides incentives that really have no direct impact on us. We feel like we have fairly reasonable controls over water usage, the things that we're worried about. We think we have good controls in place. And then kind of same thing on the, oops, I went forward. Sorry, that was on the incentive bill on 1030. On the large load data centers, the regulatory bill. This bill would call for us to adopt and modify our regulations and processes. We don't know the details of what that would look like. In discussions with city development, I kind of look at it as like these are probably things that we would want to do potentially anyways. And so we're again not super concerned about this bill. You could say it's a home rule thing saying we should adopt some of these regulations. I understand if council wanted to take that position from a policy standpoint. From a practical standpoint, we don't have significant concerns at this point about either of these bills. Peggy, from a process standpoint, do you have anything to highlight on either of these data center bills?
Yeah, you bet. Neither of them have moved very far. Neither have had a vote in a committee. Leadership in the House has really been pushing for the bill sponsors of both bills to get together and try to see if there is some sort of compromise language, compromise position that could move these bills forward. So that's kind of where they sit right now, but no votes have taken place on either bill.
So I don't know if you had specific questions about either of these bills or just wanted to learn more. If you wanted to take a position broader from a policy standpoint on either, we're happy to take your direction.
Anybody have any questions on it?
I have one question about 1030. So is it correct in saying that this does not impede our ability to collect local tax revenue on data centers?
Yeah, that's my understanding. This incentive the incentive program would have no impact on local taxes. So we just keep an eye on them, and if they end up merging together and something gets raised, that we can run it up the flagpole for y'all.
Sure.
Okay. Then the last bill that you specifically asked for an update on was Senate Bill 97, decriminalization of adult commercial sexual activity. We did not do a significant staff review of this, basically because the bill got killed off, I think the day after we talked about it. So you probably saw it in the news. So this is the bill that would legalize adult sexual activity prostitution.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know if you had specific questions of that, but that one has died. So.
Yes, Morris, Councilmember Morris.
Thanks for the update on that. No questions on that last bill, but a quick update on 1106 eviction protections for tenants.
Yes.
I saw an email from DMAR Government Affairs this morning that said that the bill sponsors are asking for it to die in committee. So that was probably not moving forward.
Okay.
It died. Yes, it died actually this evening. So before we got on the Zoom this evening, it died in committee.
Councilmember Martinez.
Okay, I'd like to open up and reopen the discussion we had a few weeks ago about Bill 1005, which is the Worker Protection Act, the Worker Protection Collective Bargaining. We kind of put that on the table. I'd like to bring that back for discussion. I am advocating that we support this. I think there's a lot of good things in this bill. And I think it would impact positively a lot of our workers in the city of Thornton. So I'm gonna advocate, take a support position on that.
Councilmember Algie.
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. I am in full agreement with my colleague, Councilmember Martinez, on this. I think we should take a support role in 1005 as well. I think it's in, Megan, is it in the Senate now?
Yes, correct. It has passed through the first committee in the Senate. It is expected to pass on the floor and then get vetoed by the governor.
Of course.
Cool.
But, you know, with that being said, though, obviously this has been an ongoing thing, which I'm very much a part of as well. And still, I think as a symbolic move, we should take a support role in this. So I join Councilman Martinez and recommend that we as a city support 1005.
Councilmember Morris.
You know what, I remember when we first talked about this, and the question was, can we get more information about that bill? Because I don't fully understand it. I don't understand the implications either. I don't know how it compares. I know Colorado has a unique hybrid right to work policy that seems to be pretty effective. But so I don't know what it means to support that as a city, and I'm not able to do that yet. So it would be great to, if we do actually have some heavier detail about this bill. I understand in concept what we're trying to do, but I don't actually know the details of it. I know we never received that.
Understood.
Councilmember Byrd.
I concur with Councilmember Morris.
Anybody else have any thoughts? No?
No, I totally support it. There's a lot of good things behind it.
Well, I lived this bill for 3 years, so I support it. So I'd like to support.
So we have a, like I said, regularly scheduled update next week. Happy to provide more information on bills tonight or next week's update.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to Metropolitan District Overview.
As Mike is coming forward on March 31st, you have a public hearing for a new proposed metro district associated with conflicts development. We recognize that quite a few council members have had limited policy actions you've had to take related to metro districts. So this is just a little bit of an orientation to give you some background and prepare you for the public hearing that we're going to have on the 31st.
Thank you, council. I'm gonna go over metro districts as Tansy mentioned just a moment ago. But if you have questions along the way, it might be good to ask as I go through the slides, or if at the end, of course, is available as well. So basically, I'm going to go over what a metropolitan is, the financial powers that a metropolitan district has, examples of metro districts, the powers limitations the districts may have, and then the formation of a district process. So the map in front of you, it's also in your packet. Everything in green in this map is a map of Thornton, of course, is metropolitan districts in Thornton. Blue is metro districts that are actually outside the city limits in the county. The take back on this map, and when I talk about general financial aspects, is almost every new residential type projects specifically, and more often as the one you'll see coming up as a commercial district. Almost any new development we're seeing is in metropolitan districts, not just here in Thornton, it's statewide. And I'll go through why you're seeing these type of tools being used for financing, where you're not seeing traditional bank loans anymore. That's pretty much gone away in the last 10 years. You almost see no projects, unless they're very small projects or maybe an apartment complex. You'll see they'll individually do those through their own financing. Sometimes infill projects will have that as well, where they don't need a large amount of infrastructure to make the project happen. And always we try to remind that developers have to pay their own way for projects in Thornton, and it's mirrored in almost every other community, that cities don't have the money to run the infrastructure up and down for these projects to develop. So metro districts themselves are in the state statute Title 32 of special districts. It's one of 7 special districts that can exist. Metro districts have to have at least 2 or more powers. In Thornton, usually you'll see them in the aspects of maybe they'll have a park. So there's a maintenance aspect for that. Roads, infrastructure, and construction usually happens with it. Other communities, you'll see other, water and sewer districts, ambulance. We don't have those. As a matter of fact, since we provide those services, they would not be allowed a metro district to have services that are provided by the city. When you look at further on metro districts, when they're actually considered a quasi-government agency, essentially once they're formed, and we'll go through formation here in a few moments, but they're political subdivision of a state, just like a city is for that matter. Considered a local government, so they have their own authority, independent government entity themselves. They have a board, so they have ability to make rules and regulations that within their organization. Most of their functions in most districts is collecting revenue, spending funds to do the infrastructure needed for developments usually, and then often to maintain open spaces, parks, sometimes private roads forever, essentially, in those, if they have those type of setups. And they're typically formed by developers. So when you see applications before you, it's almost always a developer doing that. Doesn't have to be, but that's typical. So looking into the actual service and purpose of districts, this slide kind of gets into what we usually see in Thornton: streets, water infrastructure, sanitary sewer infrastructure, parks and rec, landscaping, so the amenities. Sometimes you have a rec center associated, or pool. Sometimes they have covered controls. Often metro districts will have an HOA separate from the district. So the mid-district is just dealing with their own properties and the funding sources, and they have an HOA do the covenants controls. But that doesn't have to happen that way. One thing that we do not, I mentioned this earlier, is metro district can't control water supply. That's supplied by the city of Thornton through our water enterprise. And police and protection. There are communities that can do that. They can empower. You'll mostly see these in counties where you'll have a agency fund for services like fire or police in some cases indirectly to provide those services, usually in a county environment. So getting the financial powers, as I mentioned earlier, they're usually formed by developers to finance infrastructure necessary for the support of a new subdivision. That's point one. The functions of the metropolitan can include the construction, ongoing maintenance of public facilities. Metro district has various financial powers, including the power to tax. They can tax and or excess fees for services it provides, and issues tax exempt bonds. And that's kind of the key part, is their bonding capacity. They can bond just like a city can so you get tax incentives from that person, tax exempt. Usually bonds are lower interest rates than financial. When I talk to developers, if you went back in time about 15 years ago, you may only had to put down 10 to 20% of your development cost, maybe even less under regular financial models. More modern, if you talk to a developer today, if they wanted to go to a bank and get a loan, they're gonna have to have significant amount of assets and a significant amount of money, and often very high interest rates with those, because there's a lot of risk, and there has been since the financial crisis in 2008, when that kind of happened. I haven't seen too many folks do those type of funding sources because of that cost. That is an enormous amount of cost upfront. And what the cost and effect is, if I have to pay that money upfront, I'm gonna have to put that on the backs of home builders, lot owners immediately to return my cost on that investment. Where a bond, just like a government bond is, and I'll go into the bonds here in a moment, it could be amortized for 30 to 40 years. Now, the home buyer does pay for that because they are getting a benefit, right? They're getting the roads, they're getting whatever else they get in there. But in theory, the home prices would not be escalated because of that infrastructure cost, because that is a pass down the line type of cost that developers would have the home buyers take on longer. One thing to note too is when you see as a council, you'll get a service plan, they call it. I'll go into that in a few moments as well. It's gonna have what they expect the cost is for their project's gonna cost, X millions of dollars. They're gonna have the amount they're proposing to bond. Usually it's almost 1-to-1. If it isn't, we usually ask questions why you need to bond more than your cost of your entire infrastructure. Sometimes that's escalated cost. Maybe it's a major development that it's gonna have a 20-year build out timeframe. But nonetheless, we ask those questions. So all this stuff is formed before anybody lives in these houses. So council reviews this, they go through a lecture process. I'll go into that in a moment. They'll usually issue their first bonds as part of that type of process. Now, where the fire protection comes into play, and where this gets in is important, is if they want to go back again and ask for more debt, every person who lives in that they vote on it themselves before they would go back to council. Council would have to reconsider any more additional debt beyond what you initially approved. So there is protections there. They weren't always the case. They are required now. So the board does have to go back and say, hey, we need more money. So we're going to have to vote as a board, home buyers that would happen to live in there, and then go back to the city. It's not too common because the developers try to ensure that they have adequate funds before that happens, but that could happen and often the only time I've seen it happen is when the home buyers want something else. They want an amenity that wasn't foreseen in their development. So they'd say, hey, we're gonna have to ask for more money. Let's ask the city for more money. The other things you'll see too is refinancing. That could come back to council if a home, usually these are home owner districts at that point, developers long gone, and they're just like you would want to refinance your debt. They may go back and say, hey, we can get a better interest rate now. We're going to do that. We're going to have to go to council though to ask for that to occur. So you would see those type of actions as well. When it comes to taxing, just like any other property tax, these are assessed yearly for folks. And they do have to pay their property tax. If they don't, there's obviously liens like any other non-tax paying person would have to pay. There are fees, so you'll see in the districts where every new home or commercial building has an X dollar, it may say $2,000 a unit or whatever. You'll see those buried in there. Staff is looking at those. Finance looks at those too. As long as they're consistent to what we call the model service plan, which is one that the city's agreed that is acceptable plan. Usually those are something the staff would support. If they go outside those realms where they ask for an enormous amount of money, they want a different mill levy, which I'll go into in a moment. Then we do try to scrutinize us because we understand that's a long-term obligation those homeowners will have to deal with. So what I have here is an example. 3 different type of homes, $400,000, $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 home. What this document showing is what you see on your tax bill. So the average tax, the amount of bills, which is your school, the city, the county taxes, library tax, any other taxes you may pay, is about 100 bills in Thornton. Metro districts have a tendency you'll often see the number 50 mills because that's the max that we have in our model service plan. And they have an operation and maintenance fee. These are ones that have a tendency to stick around even if the debt's paid off. These are to maintain the open space, kind of like your HOA dues, I guess, if you want to think of it that way. You're paying your taxes versus you're paying in an HOA, shall we say. So you see those combined mills get to 165 mills. So if you see your house, so you see your $400,000 house is about just under $5,000 yearly tax burden. Just under $2,000 of that goes to the metro district. And it escalates up. It's basically 1/3 of your total tax bills going to that metro district. So obviously, the more expensive your house is, the more you're going to pay in that tax. And then, of course, your house value goes up. All those numbers go up as well. But just to be clear, if you didn't have a metro district, you'd take those numbers minus the tax, metro district tax, that's your standard tax you'd pay. So there is a cost to a home buyer to pay for these long-term, 30, 40 years, potentially they're paying these escalated because anytime you do any type of performance, you're expecting values to actually increase over time. So they do expect that they'll collect more revenue as time goes by. Sometimes that's good because the debt gets paid off earlier, because just like your mortgage on your house, it has a principal to pay it off. And if you pay it off early, that's always good as well. So the limitations, the state has dealt with metro districts for well over 40 years. Early metro districts had a lot of high failure rate. A lot of it was there was not many protections for the home buyer. Especially the 80s and 90s, a lot of those home buyers walked away from their homes because the developer may have not fulfilled their obligations to complete projects and pay back their bonds. It left it on the home buyers to pay those off. And without caps that we have built in, the state has built in on your mills, the caps became unlimited to people. So that meant if I'm a bondholder, I'm expecting to get paid back at that point. So unfortunately, we had some areas in Colorado that actually made national news over that stuff in the early 90s. So the state has taken an aggressive stance on special districts, capping the amount of mills they can have, the notice requirements, the disclosures. They've really gotten big on that. Just last year, there was an amendment that actually enhanced disclosures even more. So additional buyers, because initially disclaimers were only for the first-time buyer, and I would have to represent or I'd have to search to see additional taxes. Now it requires any purchaser to be notified at least what the taxes will be. What they do with that, it's up to them. Hopefully explain what the money's for. So getting the service plan. So what you're going to see next Tuesday and what we work off of is a model service plan that we just recently updated in 2021. So relatively newer service plan here in Thornton. It does define the limitation the district has authority of. It goes back to the services they provide and what they can do for taxing. Their operational parameters, their improvements they're going to finance to make sure those are qualifying improvements. They're not building a foundation for a house. It is something directly related to the development, not home construction itself. The boundaries of the district, you're going to hear terminology. They'll say the district boundary, and you'll see something called the future inclusion areas. What those areas are when the developer initially creates a metropolitan district, they may only use a part of their property to actually be in the district and then leave out a property out of it for their own personal property taxes they pay on land they still own. So they may exclude those out until they have a development. Then at that point, they'll include it. You would not see that again. You as a council are reviewing the entire district boundaries for their boundary aspects themselves. Debt limitations, super important. We want to make sure that the debt is equal to or close to equal the actual cost to do those improvements. The maximum mill levies, how high they can possibly be. And then the mill levy in the terms of payback and the disclosures. We want to make sure all that stuff is disclosures. One thing you'll have, council, is you'll also see an intergovernmental agreement between you and that other government, which is the metropolitan district, on how they'll function. And they'll have to provide the city yearly reports on their performance. That's required by state law and by a city code. So the formation of a district, real quickly. So obviously you have a developer that wants to propose a project. They meet with staff. We go over the code requirements and the surface plan requirements. They explain their debt cap issue or the financing issue they have with their project. They suggest a district. They submit the service plan to us. We review it. Sometimes we can have an outside consultant review it. It goes through a public notice process. You all would ultimately approve or not approve it. And from there, if it's approved, this year, there's a May election. I believe it's May and November this year. Every other year, they have an alternative. They have a May election every other year, November every year. So if whatever timeline they're shooting for, say it's a November election, they have a deadline to meet the statutory requirements when it comes to actually having it on ballot. If they meet that ballot, it goes to the election. The election is only the people who are within the boundaries of the district. So nobody outside that district is notified except for special service districts, school districts, things like that, in the city, of course. But no property owner around that's notified as part of this process, because there's an obligation, it only affects that property, nobody around it. If the elections have held, voters approved it. It basically, at that point, it starts the process of organizing that district. They create a board, and then at that point, they start to fund their district, usually through starting their taxes. Taxes are paid in arrears, just like your property taxes are. So they'd be taxing themselves now for last year's taxes. So just quickly, the governance, they function, like I mentioned, very much like a city, shall we say, when it comes to their organizational structure. They have to have open meetings, just like council does. They have to have elections, have to have a budget that's approved every year by their board. Anybody's eligible if you live in this district boundaries or own property in the district boundary, just like you would if you were a voter elsewhere. Developer generally controls the districts at the beginning. The code does have a transition where the homeowners take over ownership, but it's usually pretty far along the process before that happens. And residents start getting elected as they buy and move into homes, of course. Most are between 5 and 7 members, and they usually have 4-year terms. And city council does oversee the compliance, their compliance service plan. Any questions?
Councilmember Morris?
Metro districts are very misunderstood, even among the real estate industry. And I think that's led to, thankfully, we do have some more transparency bills that have been passed in the last couple of years to help homeowners understand what they're getting into. My question relates to our policy internally with service plans. The big question is always like, what happens when the debt is paid off, Metro District? And normally there's a debt service and then there's an ops maintenance mill. Is that pretty typical?
Yes.
In Thornton? And do we have a policy where that ops maintenance mill continues indefinitely? Like, we never, as a city, take over the maintenance of a Metro District once it's paid off?
Excellent question. City's not responsible for the obligations of the operational maintenance aspects. Either two things can happen. They can transfer that over to the homeowner association, dissolve the district, which you all would be part of that process of dissolution of that district. We did one about a year ago. Or they can just keep the O&Ms going on forever. The district just stays there all the hours at maintenance district at that point.
Okay, so then there's never a time where the city will assume ops and maintenance once that ops mill is in debt is paid? No,
that's an obligation, unless there's some weird obligation that the city would take that on. It's
Well,
not.
I'm asking because it's not, it depends on by city.
Sure.
So like, I'm just curious what our city policy is.
We don't have we would not take on that debt in anything I'm aware of any of our policy service plan sitting out there. Our model plan doesn't have any of that type of language.
Because I think, and do we have any Metro districts that have transitioned where they've paid off and they've continued, and we haven't run into any weird transitions with neighborhoods and maintenance and them coming to us and saying, hey, like, we want to turn it over to you now that we're done?
Well, I've had that question.
Okay.
For me, but no, I mean, that's not, from that perspective, it's just like an HOA calling me, say, hey, we can't afford to take care of our stuff. Can you take care of it? It's a safety. You have an obligation, you have ownership. They often have ownership interest. And so we advise them is to either keep your bills, or you convert it over to your HOA and have them pay the dues, just like you have an ownership and responsibility. It's not the city's ownership and responsibilities.
Okay.
You're right. A lot of times, residents in these areas will see a park deteriorating, and council's kind of the first people they turn to. Why is this park deteriorating? And you have to point them back, if they do have a Metro District, to that board of directors. Yeah. Because citizens think, oh, why isn't the city keeping care of this park? Yeah.
That's about a top 10 question I get often is, would the city be interested in our open area that we have?
Okay. That's good to know. Thank you.
It might be important to note too that these Metro districts have the power of eminent domain if it's approved in their service plan. So they can go out and take the property they need for improvements, just like we could exercise condemnation.
Actually, one more question. Is there I know the state has a policy. Do we have one around max debt and max mills?
Yeah, so 50 mils is max mills. ONEs are 15 for residential. We don't have a cap on non-res for commercial type of, there's not a ownership and maintenance cap on that, partially because of you have a lot more maintenance responsibilities on commercial property than you would potentially residential. Is the attitude towards that, not to mention they have more control with that property than they do residents would have.
Right.
Are there any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right, we will now go to the review for nonprofit funding requests from Bullying Recovery Resource Center, Food for Hope, Laredon, Arc of Adams County, Almost Home, for fundraising events. And I will be recusing myself from this discussion specifically because of Laredon.
Good evening again. We have 3 new requests, and then 2 of these were discussed the last time we talked about special event requests, and I think you said just to table them for now. So wanted to bring them back to see if you want to make a decision on them or keep holding. So just as a reminder, background, this process is covered under ordinance 3572, reimbursement for travel, training, subsistence. The budget is $35,000 for special events and youth funding, and then $12,000 for school foundation. Sometimes we kind of conflate the two, and I thought it's just easier. The school foundation is a per pupil amount. It goes out every year. So just kind of going to take that out of the equation here, but want to acknowledge that your budget does include $12,000 for school foundations. Of the $35,000 budget, you've allocated about 15. We'll get into the detail here in a minute. We haven't had any youth event funding requests come to you yet, but we've recently received some. So I would anticipate that's coming here later in April for some additional youth event funding. I just, for reference, put up there last year, you all allocated $3,300 for youth event funding. So as you're balancing kind of the budget, what you want to commit to at this point, that I thought was a useful point of reference for the potential kid events that you might want to fund. So the specific requests in tonight's briefing include the Bowling Resource Center, the Belong Gala that was discussed last time. So that's one that we thought we'd revisit with you. Food for Hope is the annual bike and brew. That one was discussed previously as well. Laredon is a new one. Corks for a Cause, that's scheduled for April 30th in Denver. $500 sponsorship. As always, we can get individual tickets. You did sponsor that one in 2025 last year. Arc of Adams County, the community honors event, that's not until November. $1,000 sponsorship. Don't believe you sponsored that last year. And then the last new one, Almost Home, Pour It Forward benefit, that's coming up here April 19th. My understanding is you probably sponsored a similar event. I think it was titled or branded differently in 2025, but that you sponsored that event. That one's $1,000. So those are the new ones. As I said, your total. So you've currently approved $15,300 of special event funding tonight. If you were to fund everything, that would be an additional $4,500, which would bring you up to a total of $1,980 and a remaining balance of $15,200. So that's kind of where you sit from an accounting standpoint. Again, assuming if you were to choose to allocate everything tonight. The next slide, again, this is all in your packet, which is helpful because it's really hard to read on the slide. This is just the detail of what you approved last time. So I'll go back to the events and see if you just wanted to go through one by one. Again, the Bowling Resource Center and the Food for Hope are revisit, so you can decide you want to go through those again, or happy to table them and bring them back for a later discussion. Probably ought to talk about the Laredon and the Almost Home events, since those are in April.
Councilmember Byrd?
I would suggest we just go ahead and move forward with sponsoring all of the ones that were mentioned.
I concur. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I concur with Councilmember Byrd as well.
also agree.
Somebody else? Okay.
All five.
With the chair.
Okay. We'll see you probably in a few weeks for some kid funding, youth funding. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to our other discussion items, for board and commission reports, Dr. Cog, board work session.
Okay, there was a Dr. Cobb meeting last Wednesday that I did not attend. I was on a plane, I went back from NLC, so I'm not even sure they had a quorum. It was a remote meeting, so I don't have a whole lot of updates for that. I'll mention this now, because it is Dr. Cog related. So Dr. Cog has organized a peer exchange trip with the Puget Sound Regional Council in Seattle. And time to time, these MPOs organize these trips so that we can learn from best practices and remember when it comes to transportation funding cycles and how to become more competitive with grants when it comes to the allocated funds from the federal government. And so that's what we're doing as a board for Dr. Cog, and I plan on attending that. So that's coming up in May of first week of May for 3 days in Seattle. So we're trying to get as many board members to go. Last year, the Seattle group came to Dr. Cog, so it was our turn to go there. And I do have comments on the travel policy, but I'll save that for the next part.
Okay. So nothing from finance and budget committee?
No.
Okay. The E470 Authority Board of Directors meeting?
Nothing of concern.
Okay. Dr. Cog Board of Directors, or same thing?
Yeah.
NADA SPC meeting?
Okay, yeah, good one. Well, NADA's going up on Thursday. We got a number of items on our agenda, mostly focused around the upcoming CDOT Commission approval for the 10-year plan, which is in April next month. So I know several of our council have already commented on that, but this would be our last chance to make public comments in support of the 10-year plan. I hear that so there'll be conversations around that. We're gonna hear from RTD as well. And also we'll be voting on some small modifications to our guiding principles. I can pull it up if you really want to know, but it's a small change. So that's what's coming up that's what we discussed for SBC, and that is what we're discussing on Thursday.
Okay. CML Policy Committee meeting? All right, AC rep? Okay, so we'll move to council discussion items. Councilmember Martinez?
Okay.
I didn't see it go off, but.
Push at the same time. Two things. Okay. Since I already mentioned the council travel policy, I think I was talking to Councilmember Salazar. She's asking questions on how to, request going to a conference. And I told her what we traditionally have done is bring it up to council and kind of get a consensus on that. But then I looked into the actual ordinance and the policy that we have, and there's actually quite a bit of divergence from that policy. So I wanted to call attention to that, and I'm trying to pull it up, but I can't find it. But anyway, it is, just give me 1 second. It is in these pages. Here it is. Okay. So anyway, the policy is governed by ordinance 3572. I met with Tammy earlier today to talk about maybe we need to revisit and clean up this travel policy. I've talked to several council members from around the country and in Colorado, and ours is a pretty unique policy. For example, the real policy says that council members only need to inform the city council in advance of travel out of state to attend training programs. That's different than everything that I've thought ever since I joined council. And I think that it just speaks to the fact that the policy might be outdated and that we as a council and senior staff may not have been completely up to date on what the policy is. We also don't have any limits on spending in our ordinance or the number of trips that we can go, which is somewhat uncommon. All of our peer cities have either actual budget amounts that we have to allocate throughout the year, or a combination of travel, like number of trips that we can take per year as well. So, I'm not saying that anybody on this council has abused it to my knowledge or now or in the past, but I think that if we have an outdated policy, it warrants exploring, updating it and making it more modern and to protect against, this. There will be many, many councils after all of us leave, and so we want to make sure that that the policies on that is in alignment with what I think is good practice. And like, for example, it clearly states in our policy that council members the city cannot pay for council members to go on national conferences held in the last quarter of the year of term limited outgoing council members. Well, that happened last year. We had an outgoing council member who went on that trip, and I don't think that former council member Sandgren did anything wrong, but nobody knew what the actual policy was. And so I think that we need to revisit this. So my ask is that we give direction to our city attorney's office to help, look at some neighboring cities, peer cities, and come up with some recommendations on how to modernize our travel policy as a council. And that's my ask.
Does anybody else have any thoughts?
Sounds great.
Just to speak about Sandgren's situation, because we did chat about it actually right here. She had mentioned that the past practice was usually they don't go on that last quarter, but she was going because of something she was serving on, I don't know if it's CML or something else. And that typically in that specific case, they would have consensus at that time. So I think that's probably what she was going off of. I do see what you're saying though with the policy saying you don't need consensus, but then we were asking for consensus, but then there've been previous times in the past where people didn't ask for consensus and then there was confusion. So clarifying that language would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely not saying that Councilmember Sandgren did anything wrong. I'm glad she went on that trip and I encouraged it, but I had no idea that it was specifically stated in our policy that was not something that was normal. So
She had mentioned that was like a past practice that if that were to happen, that you would ask, and that's why she asked for consensus that specific time, but.
It seems more of the policies that we have in place for council to adhere to and kind of abide by is managed by us. So we have to hold ourselves accountable in that situation across most of those things. So.
Yeah, I see the future cleanup stuff of like making it so somebody's like, I'm going on a conference every week or every month. Yeah.
Under the current policy, that's actually allowed.
Yeah.
And so
As a person who travels all the time, you don't want to do that.
I agree.
For my family. But yeah, I don't think that we're abusing it by any means. I just think that just like with our development code policy, this is probably hasn't been looked at in a while, and so it just happened. I looked at it and I thought, wow, that's a lot different than I thought it was. So anyway, thank you.
So I'll start with some comparison and bring it back to a study session. And we can take a look at it. Thank you.
Okay, and then my next topic is more interesting, so more serious. So I think we've all heard a lot of discussion from our residents about public safety issues in the past 6 months, whether it's flock, emergency alert systems. Cherish and I are always hearing about sirens from a number of constituents, and so I have kind of internalized that. And it's the way I understand it is that there is a organic demand from our residents to have a more organized voice when it comes to public safety concerns. I think that people are making that clear right now, and that we are not providing them a very good outlet to do that, say coming into council meetings or emailing us directly. So I would like to propose that we direct our staff, our legal team, and our city manager's office to look at various options for creating a permanent public safety citizen board. This is not an uncommon practice. In fact, there's dozens of these boards in our peer cities around the region to varying degrees of responsibility and obligations. And I think that there is a need for that in Thornton, but it needs to be something that is uniquely suited to our city. So like there's a big spectrum. For example, Denver and Boulder look very closely at like oversight and they have a lot of power. I personally don't think that is really what's called for. But other cities like Castle Rock include a comprehensive, public safety commission that includes recommendations for policies for both fire services and police services. And basically, I see this as a way to give our residents another way to, it gives us a way to further build trust in the public safety sphere with our residents, and also to let them have a more formalized way to provide recommendations to us as we make policies when it comes to those things. Those are just my thoughts, but ultimately, I think that the council as a whole should have that discussion as to what the scope and how this board would work. But so my request is that we give staff direction to look at neighboring cities and look at the different options, and then help us facilitate maybe even a more informal way, a conversation as how we can build this board to suit our unique needs in Thornton. And I also want to make sure that the police and the fire department have a say as to what would be helpful, what would not be helpful, because I don't want this to be create problems. I want this to alleviate some of the problems that I've been seeing over the last few months. So that would be my request, is to give that direction to staff so they can present to us in the future, what that might look like in Thornton, and maybe work with us and help us as a body come up with, how that could help Thornton. So.
Does anybody have any concerns or questions?
Got a couple thoughts. I appreciate you bringing that idea forward. I mean, there's definitely some merit to it. However, I do feel like I have the opposite interaction with residents, and residents aren't clamoring for a public safety committee per se. What I'm hearing is that they expect us as citizens in our city to have oversight of our public safety, which we're doing, and which we'll continue to do. So in some ways, it's a redundant system. The residents that I'm hearing from are asking us to continue to make public safety a priority, and enhance technology, and tactics, and all the things that make our city a safer place. So, I would be curious how our current system doesn't work efficiently, because we see you guys organized a town hall, let's say, and you listen to residents in Ward 1, have concerns about certain ALPRs and all that, and that in general. So I feel like that system was working. We brought that information forward, the police responded, and that's continuing. So to add another board that's focused on public safety seems like an extra layer of bureaucracy that maybe isn't needed, because we do have direct access with our community already, and they already give us that input, which we directly give to the police and city manager. So I don't I like where your head's at with like finding ways to get like the community more involved, but forming a formal committee for that purpose, probably not necessary.
Councilmember Pinto?
Well, I mean, ever since I've been on council, every community survey that ever been published, public safety to include fire and police, have always been highly rated by citizens. I haven't fielded a single concern in Ward 3 about a public safety committee. I feel like we're trying to create solutions to problems that don't exist. And I just don't see a need for it. So, I mean, I'm not gonna support it.
Councilmember Byrd?
Yeah, I think that, I think the intention is good there, but I mean, I think that also that's our job. That's our responsibility is to listen to the citizens and work directly with the police chief and the fire chief. And our city manager to make sure that those things are being put in place. I agree that adding another layer of boards doesn't really help the narrative there. I think that it's our job to respond to that based on the things are there and kind of address those concerns. So I don't think that there's really a need for it myself either.
I think that we do need more oversight. I think that we've learned things in the past that, that haven't been mentioned that we didn't even know was happening. And so I do think that we do need more oversight. I think that a board would be an awesome way to, facilitate that for everyone. And then they could come back to us with their recommendations and things like that. I think that there's certain things that sometimes we don't even see.
I would concur with that. I would say that does happen, but I think that happens across the board with every industry, every community, everything that's there. There's always the known knowns, the known unknowns, and the unknown unknowns. But I think that I think that's a chance for us to grow as a council and working with our city staff to fix those holes where we're at. I don't think that bringing in outside opinions from residents as a board to try to kind of dictate and kind of flow what our public safety's job is per se. I don't think that's going to help. I think that what it does is it kind of convolutes the issue and causes more backlash and harm than good.
We have a right to say no to them when they bring back these decisions.
True. And I have the right to say no to the request that was put in place. That's what I'm doing.
Councilmember Walter?
Thanks for bringing it up, Councilmember Martinez, but still, I think, I haven't heard anything from Ward 2 residents about, doing something like this at this time. I mean, we are the conduit to, to the same edge to the police and fire, and they've really, the ratings are high. I mean, the interaction's great. The community policing is there, and also the fire department, they're community oriented as well. So, at this time, I don't think we should, but still nonetheless, we need to listen to residents. And obviously, if Ward 2 residents come and say, hey, look, we should do this, then that'll be a different conversation. But, I think our neighbors are the ones that need to tell us what they recommend, what they want, and then we act on that. So, at this time, I agree with my colleagues on the other side on this.
I think it's, I've gone back and forth on this idea quite a bit myself. And the more I've learned being on city council, the more I've figured out that I don't know all these people's jobs. And my fear is that we put together out the gate, we say that, oh, well, let's put a board together. And there's just a million different ways that could look. And what I'm more curious about at this point is I'm hearing from you guys in Ward 1, you're hearing a lot of concerns about public safety. I feel like I need a lot more data to know, more information to know what the concerns are, what the specific asks are, and if we're not putting the cart before the horse by just creating a board and not necessarily taking an inventory of the actual concerns and conduits for which people are connecting with our police and fire and other entities in public safety now. So I think it would be great if we could maybe, I think we've kind of done this already, but take a comprehensive look at some of that. I think with our restructurization and things like that, I've I thought quite a few times about different things, and I'm like, I want to see how things play out with having a new assistant city manager and more strategy involved. But we have, I think, a great community policing program, and I feel like our community is, for the most part, I feel like our community feels safe, or that they have a level of trust with our police department. So I think I'd be more curious right now to know exactly what you all are hearing in Ward 1 and how we can look to kind of see what's going on in all the wards and citywide, so we know exactly what the asks are from folks. Like, that's kind of where I'm more curious to say, like, right out the gate, let's put a board together. I could tell you probably 2.5 years ago, I'd say, yeah, that totally needs to happen. But what I've seen with boards and, having served on them one before, is that you put this stuff together, you put your heart and soul into it, you give it to council and they say, meh. And that just makes the community feel even more horrible so I just want us to be very intentional about how we do something like that. And so for right now, I would say no, but I am curious about what the concerns are in Ward 1. And I feel that we've addressed the siren question a few different times over the years. So I'm wondering what exactly we can do to help have folks feel safer, if that's the concern. That's where I'm at. Was there anything else? Okay. Does anybody else have any discussion? All right.
I do as well.
So we'll do Salazar and then Morris.
Okay,
So Salazar and Morris.
in the last few days, everybody got an email from Sandra about the fireworks. And I agree with her. I think we should all discuss having maybe a moratorium on the fireworks this year. I'm not saying don't do them over the 4th of July. She sent everybody one. But I'm saying that maybe we should do a drone show and a laser show instead, because statistically, we've almost always had a brush fire every single year when we shoot off those fireworks, you guys. And this year, we can't control that it's gonna go over somebody's house and not catch their yard on fire, their roof on fire. We can't control that. We've had brush trucks that sit out there while we do it. So I think that we should seriously consider doing a drone show and a laser show for the 4th of July.
I'll say valid concern. Obviously in light of what just happened, but I think two things there. One is, like, I would love to see the stats from our Parks Department about fires that were caused by our fireworks show. So we can verify that issue and if it's truly an issue. And then the second thing I would say is maybe we just need to hear again from our parks folks, like, what the plan is normally for fireworks shows, and, like, and how mitigation happens. And so we understand that, they're obviously thinking through these concerns and see what they have to say about that. Now, if they say, hey, we recommend we don't do a fireworks show this year in light of all these concerns, then hey, absolutely. But I think we just need to back it up with some hard data.
Anybody else? Oh, you have another one? I mean, about that specific issue.
No, I would concur with that. We're going into typically our wet season for the year too, so it'll be interesting to see the data pull.
Is this about this? Okay.
Yeah, I agree with Councilmember Salazar. I think that, given the fire that started maybe near close to burning down your neighborhood, then we need to exercise an extreme bit of caution, given the drought that we just implemented, the drought policies that we just implemented, and that, we should err on the side of caution. So I agree. I think we should should look at what that would mean to switch over to a drone show.
If I can offer, we do have a fireworks prohibition update planned on your look ahead for April 7th. I know we have started some internal consultation just about mitigation, safety, those kinds of things. I do think by the 7th, we could probably be prepared to have parks to share a little bit about the planning that's been in place and if there are any staff recommendations at that point, if that is workable.
Do you have any opinion?
Yeah, I agree with that too. I think we should.
I am in full support of that,
Yeah.
and I'll tell you
Yeah.
why. Because I've had many neighbors complain about the fact that we do fireworks and we're telling everybody else not to. Number one, I live right up the street from Carpenter, and there was a fire last year because I saw it with my eyes, and it was on TikTok, and it was embarrassing to be a city council member in a city where we're lighting fireworks and our field starts on fire. Thank you, fire department, for putting it out, but it just looks super irresponsible for us to do that. Yeah, that's like, and also out of respect for the folks that live in the area of the fire, I find it, just thinking about it now at this moment, like I find it ultra disrespectful that we would do fireworks show and then do a fireworks show after everything that's happened and the fact that I don't see us getting a lot of rain anytime soon. And so that being said, I fully agree with that, but I brought this up with Tashko many moons ago about let's just start with moving the December fireworks show, even though I love Christmas fireworks, don't get me wrong. But let's start with moving that to a drone show. We did a little one, it was cool. I know the cost is kind of rough, but the thing is like we are just not in a place anymore in this state where we can continue to do this, so.
Sorry to interject, but to your point, Councilmember Salazar, last year, 4th of July, my neighborhood is very quiet except 4th of July. I like to light fireworks up. So my house across the street, one of those rockets went into the house. Luckily, nothing happened. Thornton Fire was able to come because it was like 11:35 at night. So we were done at Carpenter with everything, right? They got there quick, but still, I think that's something we need to look at too, is to enforce. I know our resources are strained, but we need to look at stopping the fireworks in the park, in the neighborhoods from being out of control. So once again, I double down and I agree with Councilmember Salazar, Councilmember Martinez. We should do a drone show as well. Thank you, ma'am.
Sorry, just to be clear, so are we sticking with the April 7th plan?
I would like to have the opportunity to bring back cost considerations, other things as a part of that report on April 7th.
Cool, thank you.
So my other thing is, now that we have started this whole drought situation, I have had numerous calls. I've had sprinklers already on. I've had people washing their cars in the streets. I've had call after call after call all weekend. It was insane. As a matter of fact, I went over to my neighbor's house and I was like, you might want to shut off your sprinklers. They were full on. A bunch of other neighbors have said it's just been crazy all weekend. So I don't know what you want to do. Are we gonna do fines on watering? What are we gonna do about this?
Yes.
We need to discuss this, you guys, because it's crazy. It's just gonna get worse.
Yeah, we can reiterate and send maybe a follow-up report that summarizes the presentation you got last week and sort of distill down some talking points and some of the key enforcement strategies, if that's helpful.
When I went next door to tell my neighbor to turn off his sprinklers, he said, "Where did this information come from?" He hadn't heard it on the news because he doesn't watch it. Yeah, I said, "Where do you get your water bill?" And he said, "Well, they sent it to me via email." And I said, "Well, it was probably in your email."
There is a mailer that is going to be going out. We'll follow back. We'll get you a written update just to remind you of the things that were in the presentation, maybe share some key talking points that you can share with neighbors and do a reminder of sort of the enforcement and communication strategies. And then would that be helpful?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't the drought one just a recommendation not to do these things? There's not really a hardcore enforcement.
Yeah, I
on
didn't
this.
think there was.
So it does, with the action, you have empowered the utility director to put in place regulations and to do fines. Like basically all of our enforcement philosophies, we would start with education and those kinds of things. But
So in this situation, you would just need to file the complaint like we would with somebody that has a license plate.
Councilmember Martinez?
Yeah, on that point, like we do have these restrictions and we've empowered our utilities director. But the way I understand it is there's also, we as a city have to reduce our water consumption by 10%. Is that right?
That's
So
right.
how are we gonna achieve that with like the parks and the swimming pools and the golf course? How's
Right.
that gonna work?
Yeah, so we are working on a follow-up report. You had asked for details from the Parks Department about our water reduction strategies. And I don't believe that's completed yet, but we'll check in on the status of that.
One more.
Okay.
Sorry. Can we declare May 8th, educate, provider appreciation day for, childcare? And do a proclamation for it.
Do you have particular language or?
I said, we can,
Okay.
he told me I just needed to.
Okay, great.
Is that okay with everybody? Okay. Next is Morris.
Awesome. Couple things. I wanted to confirm the date for, maybe it's May 8th, for the resolution we want to do for the kids that are enlisted in the military. And then we talked about the last planning session. So of course, earlier in the month is better. So let me just plan for that so I can start sharing that date with those folks.
So we were talking about this morning. I do think we were planning to propose May 26th. That would give us a lot of time to promote it. And it would be right before the Memorial Day holiday. We thought there might be some symbolism about that, but we hadn't finalized that on your look ahead yet, but that was what we were discussing this morning.
Can we put it at the beginning of the month? Because what normally happens around that time of the month for those guys, they start leaving to boot camp. And so we hate to miss some of those folks and not have the opportunity to be
Yeah.
recognized.
So May 12th is your other council meeting in May.
Okay, great. May 12th. Thank you.
Did you have anything else for us?
Yeah.
Okay.
Couple other things. So I know most of us, I think we did the Anythink Library tour last Friday. Amazing spot, really excited about it. Two things that really stood out to me, that what I'm gonna ask for here as a council is, during the tour, they highlighted the geothermal system that was heating the building, and a few other things. It seemed like a pretty impressive system. And then there was also that big kind of steel structure in the beginning of the building or at the entrance, which super cool that apparently they built using like virtual reality and some really kind of neat tech. And so my question to the executive director was, hey, are we gonna have any kind of, what is it, like educational display to talk about geothermal and how, and that, energy and engineering around that and its connection with nature? And then also, is there anything display wise, educational around like how this thing was built? And part of it was what triggered that was like, this is super cool. I'm 42 years old and I'm inspired by what I'm hearing. I can't imagine what like the little kids that are going to be visiting this place and how they might be inspired by some of these things they see and hear about on site. So my question was, can we, and I don't know if it's normal or not, but can we as a council submit like an official letter to anything to request that we have those type of educational elements be set up in the library for use for kind of, I guess, permanent display. So the details of what that is, like, I'm sure they can work it out, but I would like, as a council, with it being on city property, in a city partnership, I think we should have some input on that to kind of help inspire our next generation that'll be there. So what do you guys think?
I'm with that.
I like it.
We can certainly draft a letter. We could also start with an inquiry just to formally understand what is planned first. We can also.
Well, I
draft-
asked that on
Okay.
site and they didn't have anything planned. And so that's why I was like, well, we should make it maybe an official ask from us to see what we can do. And I know they're in their kind of closing phase of construction. And so I know the sooner the better, in terms of getting that notice there, to figure out how we can get that done. And sorry, was there a consensus on that?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. The other thing, and I don't know how this might tie into like our policy, but I had a question about like parks and open space and trails. So during one of our orientations, Parks, spoke to us about, hey, here's everything that's going on. And we had a question like, hey, what does our acreage look like in our city in terms of parks, trails, and open space, rights of way, all those different things. And so thankfully, Rob got us all those stats and we were looking at it. And it was super interesting. We had, I think between parks and open space, we have like 8.4% of our city land is allocated to that, adding trails. And the golf course, it bumps up to like 9.8% or something like, so it's around like 2,400 acres. And so looking around at other cities, our city, for as large as it is, we have a relatively low percentage of parks and open space. I think our only North Glen, Brighton, Commerce City, by number of acres have less than us, at least in the immediate vicinity. Erie has less than us too, but of course they're all smaller cities than us. So my question, the thought was is there a place where we as council set a policy where our new goal is to target 15% of parks and open space in our city over a certain time frame? And I don't know whether that is a good or a bad idea. So my ask of staff would be, can we analyze that question? What would it take? What are the implications, budget wise, and of course, staff, and is there even 1,000 acres of land? Because that's what it equates to. Approximately about 900,000 acres of additional land that would hit that 15% mark based on our current acreage as a city. So can we do that? Can we look into that and understand if it's a good or a bad decision, or is it even possible?
I agree.
I'm in support of that.
Great.
I think weirdly, Westminster has it in their charter or something.
They have more than us.
Oh, yeah, they do, yeah.
Like 4,000 or 5,000.
Yeah.
We'll do some follow-up work if there's interest in that. You will, probably the place that might exist is either in the comprehensive plan or in the parks and open space master plan, which will be coming to you later this year. So we'll do some follow-up research.
Okay.
Thank you. That's it.
Right, Councilor Bird.
Couple of quick things. One, I got a request from some residents regarding our parks, and I think I saw an email come through as the city resident, staff as well. Do we know if there was a session where the closing of the parks during winter time was discussed? And if so, if anybody can provide me with a date on that, or if this was just a decision made outside of session. For instance, the baseball fields, we close them during winter because they're because of the snowpack and stuff getting on the fields and ruining the fields. Just curiosity, because I told this resident that I would check into this if there was discussed during any kind of session, or if this was just a city decision that was being made.
Whether it was discussed with the council,
Correct.
the seasonal changes to services, no, there wasn't a specific council presentation last year.
Perfect. Checked off my list. So two more things. One I want to bring in front of council, but it does have a ask for staff as well. We have a very beautiful Veterans Memorial Aquatic Center and things that are in place. One of the things that I think would be a really nice addition that we could do there to also help kind of boost current and former council that has served with our city is to look into any council members or mayors that have actually served in our armed forces
Mhm.
and have a plaque put up in our aquatic center that would have their names, the branch they served, and you know, the times that they were on council. So we have 3 on our current
Mhm.
council. So I mean, I think this would be a really great way to kind of help add more to that. And if this ask from the city staff is if we can see about any of the past the former members that have served, that we could add them into it. I know you mentioned one now, as well, that's a former member that, is on commission or something now, or he works for Adams County. I don't remember who
Our clerk, our current clerk reporter, Ward 3 council member, Joe Sigelbaum. Yep.
So, I think that would be a really cool addition to kind of help add that to, our veteran parks then. But I was asked council to.
Can I clarify? So the VMAC, the aquatic facility is not a city facility. Are you talking about the park? The veterans?
Yeah.
Okay, Memorial Park. Okay.
So just ask for council if we could look into that and see.
Yeah, absolutely. No, is it?
Another thing that I think would be kind of a good idea to kind of help try to get some of the residents involved is a lot of the cities around us, their mayors, city leaders, city council members give out challenge coins throughout different things to different kids or different people that accept different situations that happen where they kind of earn that coins in process. I think it'd be a really good idea if we did something similar. But we could expand it out, not necessarily just for council or mayor, but into city leadership. And then if we have, you know, teenagers or kids who collect all of them, you know, we can present them like, hey, you did great service for the city because each council member has, you know, done something, or Chief Beard gave them a challenge coin for something that's there. So just kind of get more involvement from our residents into kind of trying to help the city and kind of push things forward, ideas for them. So another idea just kind of throw out there to see.
Yeah, I think that's a cool, super cool idea. And we have the opportunity to go out into so many different kid groups and in classrooms, and it feels weird when you can't like say, oh man, great, like I'm gonna choose a kid who did really well. What can I give them that has like lasting impact? And I think that's
Yeah, I mean, I
super cool idea.
know in the past, our staff had given out like the little trucks that like the little recycle trucks that had Thornton on it and stuff to the kids, and just like kind of like kids love that kind of stuff and it kind of helps boost things up. I think it'd be a good idea to come put out there to help kind of that.
So I just want to be clear that, are you looking just for us to design something you can have, or you want us to build a program around it?
Little column A, little column B. So around, I don't necessarily even think that the program would be as critical. I think it'd be a good idea just to kind of have a design and kind of things that we could hand out in that sense. And you know, maybe down the road we set it up so that if a kid collects, you know, the fire chiefs, the police chiefs, you know, city councils and the mayors, then, you know, we give them some kind of other reward or something that's there. Just kind of an incentive program to kind of do more things for the community and kind of boost things. To Drew's point, when I spoke with one of our local Boy Scout troops, that would have been a great opportunity to be able to, you know, hand that out to one of the children that's there who's already trying to give back to their community anyway.
We can do some research if there's interest in learning more, see what.
And I'd like, for an example too, I know Westminster has a challenge coin, so that's a good one to kind of see. And I don't know what their criteria is on who gives them out and what they're doing. I know that Denver, the mayor has his own that he gives out to people. So there's different kind of examples of different cities locally that kind of do similar ideas.
I think it's cool. I wish I got a challenge coin when I was pretend city council member in 7th grade.
And look at you now.
I know, isn't that weird?
She still wants a challenge coin.
Yeah, so I need one. All right. Does anybody else have any discussion items? I have 2. The first one is I applied for the scholarship again to go to local progress and it was accepted. They're paying for my travel, my air flight travel and my hotel. But I would need resources for the $100 registration fee, lift and per diem. I guess according to what council member, just letting you all know. So that'll be in July. And it's in Baltimore. And then the second thing, I talked to Tansy this afternoon. I've had some input about the Grandview ponds and it being littered pretty bad. And so we want to plan, John and I have been talking about planning a cleanup day. And this seems like the perfect opportunity because there was another option for another property, but that doesn't seem as bad. So one of our neighbors bringing this forward to us was like kind of perfect timing. But Tansy said she'd look into like what that looks like for us doing a volunteer cleanup day. So just wanted to get the logistics on, like if we could get gloves and trash bags and then have our trash services pick up the garbage because putting it in my little electric car would be weird. And that's about it with that, but I just wanted to kind of bring that forward. And my hope is that we could do more of those as council members and other city leaders, so we could kind of just get the community involved in helping pick up some of this stuff, because that area is a huge open space. And I can't imagine our city, our Parks and Rec workers having to go around and pick up a little trash, but if we did it and made it kind of a fun activity for just one day for Earth Day or something, we could get a lot of our areas cleaned up that we need to around the city. So
It sounds like an opportunity for a challenge coin.
I know we're running late for time, but just for quickly, the railway. It's been kind of on my mind for a while too. My wife gets on me and goes, "Hey John, why don't you clean up Brandon Place Park? You're just sitting home. Why don't you do something useful and pick up trash in the neighborhood?"
John just sitting.
So I think that's a good idea. I think that's something we're gonna bring up at our community meeting Sunday afternoon at Carpenter. I kind of want to see, I know we had the one Saturday, I was able to attend that, but still, I think, we can get community involved and have us as council members be involved cleaning up in our respective parks and our respective wards. I think that will build cohesion in community and also trust in their electeds. That, that we're not asking folks to do something we're not willing to do ourselves. So Grandview Ponds be a good starting point for us to see how that goes, but I would like to do, especially in Ward 2, do more cleanups, my park especially, and it's almost done, so. I'm gonna stop there because it's getting late.
Does anybody have anything else? All right, thank you.